Lord Felix Varley wrote his name on Lady Cressida Vale's dance card before she had given him permission. He did it with a smile, with a bow, with the kind of polished grace that made rudeness look like courtship if one watched from across a chandeliered room. The ivory pencil moved over the small square of card as though it had always belonged in his hand, and for one startled second, Cressida forgot the noise of the ballroom, the violins, the soft crash of silk skirts, the laughter rising beneath, the painted ceiling of Lady Tremaine's Mayfair house. All she saw was his black-gloved fingers closing around the one object she had not meant anyone to touch. "There," Lord Varley said, returning the mother-of-pearl card to her with a pleasant tilt of his head. "Now the evening need not trouble you." Cressida accepted it because refusing would have made a scene, and scenes were expensive things for women who lived on borrowed patience. The card was cool against her palm, smooth from age, its tiny hinge at the top worn by her mother's fingers, long before Cressida had been old enough to know that a ballroom could be as dangerous as a battlefield. Though no one raised a weapon and everyone smiled. London, 1817, had taught her that a lady might be ruined by a whisper no louder than a breath behind a fan. It had taught her that poverty in an aristocratic family did not look like hunger at first. It looked like an old gown altered one time too many, gloves mended so neatly. They seemed respectable until candlelight found the stitch, a hired carriage dismissed before supper to save the fee, and an aunt who called dependents gratitude whenever guests were close enough to hear. "Do not stand so." Stiffly, Cressida. Lady Octavia Pembury murmured beside her, her gaze fixed on the room rather than on the niece she had brought there like a duty she wished to be praised for performing. A young woman should look pleased when a gentleman of consequence notices her. Lady Octavia's plumes trembled as she spoke, white and rigid above her silver turban, and the diamonds at her throat flashed with a brilliance that made the frayed edge of Cressida's left glove feel suddenly hot against her skin. "I am pleased to be noticed with respect," Cressida said quietly. Lady Octavia's smile did not move. "Careful, child. Pride is charming only in heiresses." Cressida lowered her eyes, not in surrender, but because the alternative was to let her aunt see the anger that had kept her alive through 3 years of being grateful in public and unwanted in private. She was Lady Cressida Vale, younger daughter of the late Earl of Valehurst, and that title still opened doors. It did not pay dressmakers. It did not soften a guardian's resentment. It did not keep coal in a grate after midnight, when Pembury House grew cold enough to make her breath ghost white above her counterpane. It did not restore a father who had left affection behind but very little income, nor a mother whose last keepsake rested now in Cressida's hand, marked by another man's name. The mother-of-pearl dance card had been Lady Valehurst's. It was delicate, oval, and faintly luminous, with a spray of carved lilies along its edge and a narrow pencil attached by a tiny chain. Her mother had carried it through seasons when people had still believed the Vale name meant security. Sometimes when Cressida was alone, she opened and closed the little cover just to hear the soft click, a sound so small it felt private, like a memory choosing not to abandon her. Tonight, beneath the candlelight, she noticed something she had not noticed before. Along the inner seam, the lining had lifted by the width of a thread. A thin hidden space waited under the ivory backing, too slight to hold anything important, and yet the sight of it made her fingers tighten. "Lady Cressida," Lord Varley's voice drew her back. "You have not looked to see what I have claimed." The word slid through her before she could stop it. She glanced down. His name appeared beside the opening country dance, then again beside the quadrille, and again beside a later set. 3 places, too many for indifference, not quite enough to be a declaration. Precisely enough to start talk. "You are generous with my evening, Lord Varley," she said. He laughed softly, as though she had delighted him. He was handsome in the accepted way, fair-haired, clear-eyed, and dressed with the expensive restraint of a man who wished everyone to know he could afford excess, but had chosen elegance instead. Women noticed him. Mothers approved of him. Men who owed him money avoided looking at him for too long. Cressida had heard his name in drawing rooms spoken with admiration and caution, often in the same breath. Lord Felix Varley, Earl of Keldane, had charm enough to make a threat sound like a compliment. "I would not dare steal what was freely offered," he said. "Wouldn't you?" The words slipped out before Prudence caught them. His smile remained, only his eyes changed. For a heartbeat they sharpened, pale and cold, and Cressida understood that she had shown him the edge of herself too soon. Lady Octavia touched Cressida's elbow. It was a light touch, almost affectionate to anyone watching. "My niece is fond of wit," she said. "It is one of the few luxuries left to her." Cressida felt the insult settle between them like dust. Lord Varley bowed toward Lady Octavia. "Then I shall count myself fortunate to be entertained." "You are too kind," Lady Octavia replied, and there was a note beneath the words that Cressida did not like. It was not gratitude. It was relief. Across the ballroom, beneath garlands of greenery and candlelit sconces, ladies arranged themselves in clusters of silk and judgment. Their voices were soft, but Cressida had spent too many seasons near refreshment tables not to have learned the language of fans and glances. Miss Rosamond Pike leaned toward her mother, eyes bright with the pleasure of having something to pity. Lady Bexley raised her brows as if Cressida's dance card had become public property the moment Varley touched it. A girl of 19 in a blue gown whispered, "Is that Lady Cressida Vale?" "I thought she had no fortune at all," her companion answered. "Then she is fortunate Lord Keldane has charitable taste." Cressida kept her chin level. She had perfected that gesture in rooms where people remembered her father's title, just long enough to wonder why his daughter wore last season's lace. She had learned to be still while others measured her worth in dowry, youth, and usefulness. She had learned that if she flinched, someone would be kind enough to call it sensitivity and cruel enough to repeat it at supper. "You must not mind them," Lord Varley said. He had heard then. Of course he had. "London is never more entertained than when it pretends to be moral. I mind being misread more than being discussed. Then let us give them something simple to understand." He offered his arm. The set was forming. Lady Octavia's fingers tightened once against Cressida's elbow, and Cressida felt the message clearly. "Smile. Go. Do not cost me anything." She placed her gloved hand on Lord Varley's sleeve. His coat was fine black wool, smooth as water, and she disliked the small satisfaction that crossed his face when she did it. As he led her forward, the crowd parted with the mild curiosity granted to a pairing that did not quite make sense. Cressida knew what they saw. An earl with prospects. A lady with blood but no money. A guardian too eager to look serene. They did not see the mother-of-pearl card pressed against Cressida's palm. The one secret inheritance no creditor had catalogued, and no aunt had managed to sell. They did not see that the little hinge had loosened further, and that, beneath the linings, something pale rested where there should have been only shell. Paper, perhaps. A folded scrap hidden years ago by a woman who had known she was leaving her daughter too soon. Cressida's heart gave one hard beat. Before she could look again, Lord Varley turned her into place opposite him. The musicians lifted their bows. "You look troubled," he said. "Do I?" "Only to someone watching closely. Then I must hope most people are not." "I am." His smile returned, fuller now, meant to reassure anyone who saw it. "And before the evening is finished, Lady Cressida, I mean to make certain everyone else is watching as well." The first note swept through the ballroom, bright and orderly, and Cressida moved because etiquette demanded motion even, when instinct begged for stillness. She stepped, turned, and crossed beneath the golden blaze of chandeliers, while Lord Varley's name burned on her dance card like a mark she had not chosen. At the far end of the room, just beyond the open doors, a stir passed through the guests. A tall gentleman in dark evening dress had entered without announcement loud enough to interrupt the music, yet the room seemed to notice him all the same. Conversations thinned. Mothers straightened. Young ladies remembered their posture. Even Lord Varley's attention shifted for the smallest part of a second. Cressida followed that shift and saw a man standing where the candlelight met the shadow of the doorway, broad-shouldered, unsmiling, and still enough to make the rest of the room appear restless. She knew him before Lady Octavia's whispered breath confirmed it from behind a fan. His Grace Tobias Aveling, Duke of Halverton, had come to Lady Tremaine's ball. And though Cressida was certain, there were prettier women near him, richer women, women with untouched gloves and futures arranged like flowers in crystal vases, the Duke was not looking at them. He was looking at her dance card. The moment Cressida saw the Duke of Halverton looking at her dance card, she closed her fingers over it. The movement was small, almost nothing, yet Lord Varley noticed. He always noticed what could be used. "You have a habit of hiding things, Lady Cressida," he said as the country dance carried them apart, then brought them together again under the bright discipline of music. "A dangerous habit in London. Only when one has something worth taking," she replied. His smile did not falter. That was what made him unnerving. A man with less polish would have frowned, or tightened his mouth, or betrayed offense in some honest way. Lord Felix Varley merely adjusted his pace to hers, and made the next turn look effortless. From a distance they must have seemed well matched. His fair head bent near hers, her pale gown moved with his black evening coat. Their joined hands rose and separated, in perfect time. Anyone watching from the walls would see elegance, not pressure. They would see an earl paying unusual attention to a lady whose prospects had been discussed in pitying tones for 3 seasons. They would not see how precisely he placed himself, so that Cressida could not look toward the doorway without appearing rude. They would not see how often his gaze dropped to the mother-of-pearl card. They would not hear the mild threat beneath his pleasant voice. "I hope you are enjoying the evening," he said. "It appears. You have arranged enough of it to make enjoyment unnecessary. You wound me. I suspect you recover quickly." His laugh was soft, just loud enough for the nearest couple to hear and mistake for flirtation. Across the set, Miss Rosamund Pike watched with lifted brows. She was 19, blue-eyed, freshly presented, and surrounded by the invisible armor of a large dowry. Beside her, her mother leaned toward Lady Bexley and whispered behind a painted fan. Cressida did not need the words. She knew the shape of them. Poor Lady Cressida. Lord Keldane must be very kind. Or very bored. The first dance ended in a flurry of bows and curtsies. Cressida tried to step away at once, but Varley offered his arm before she could retreat. "The quadrille, I believe. Already?" she asked. "You wrote your name there, certainly." "I did not. A lady's memory must not be taxed in a crowded room. My memory is quite serviceable. Then you remember Lady Octavia's wishes." It was said quietly. No one else could have heard. Yet it struck with more force than if he had spoken aloud. Cressida looked past his shoulder to her aunt, who stood near a bank of hothouse flowers, her expression bright with social satisfaction. Lady Octavia had the peculiar talent of looking serene only when someone else was trapped. "My aunt's wishes are numerous," Cressida said. "They cannot all be obeyed at once." Varley's eyes warmed with false admiration. "How spirited you are when you forget your position." Her hand tightened around the dance card. Beneath the mother-of-pearl cover, that hidden looseness in the lining seemed to press back against her palm, as if the small object itself urged her not to yield. She had not had time to open it. She had not dared. Too many eyes followed her. Too many people were eager for one mistake. She allowed Varley to lead her into the quadrille, because to refuse him after one dance would create precisely the talk he wanted. To accept him again also created talk. That was the genius of his trap. Whichever door she chose, society stood on the other side with a verdict prepared. The quadrille began. Cressida moved through figures she had known since girlhood. Forward, turn, cross, return. Smile when addressed. Lower the eyes when watched too closely. Her mother had once told her that dancing was conversation written with the body. Tonight, Cressida understood that a woman could be made to speak a sentence she had never intended. Varley kept perfect time. He did not grip her crudely. He did nothing a hostess could object to. But when his fingers met hers, they lingered a breath too long. When the pattern brought them side by side, he angled his body so she must move where he wished. Once, during a turn, his thumb pressed against the inside side of her wrist through the thin kid leather of her glove. Not enough to hurt, enough to remind. "You are very pale," he murmured. "Am I? You should not be nervous. I am considered an excellent prospect." "By whom?" "By women who understand arithmetic. Then I must be deficient in sums." His eyes flicked to her face. The smile stayed. "No, Lady Cressida. I think you understand them perfectly. Your father left little. Your aunt has carried more than her share. Pembury House is not maintained on noble memories." The room seemed suddenly louder. Violins, laughter, the brush of satin, the click of heels on polished floor. Cressida heard all of it, and underneath, heard the thing he had not quite said. Debt, obligation, sale disguised as salvation. "My family circumstances are not a dance floor topic," she said. "Everything is a dance floor topic if one speaks softly enough." The figure separated them. Cressida stepped away, turned with another gentleman, and used the moment to breathe. At the far end of the ballroom, the Duke of Halverton remained near the doorway. He had not advanced into the crush. He had not sought introduction, nor had he allowed the eager mothers around him to draw him into their web. He stood with one hand behind his back, his dark gaze moving not over the room, but through it. He looked like a man reading a document full of lies and finding the one line that mattered. For one impossible instant, his eyes met hers. Cressida did not ask for help. She would not. A woman in her position could not afford to look distressed before a duke, especially not one whose attention could turn rumor into wildfire. So she smiled. It was the smile she had used at dinners, where Lady Octavia praised her economy, as if poverty were a feminine virtue. It was the smile she had worn when old friends pretended not to notice that her pearls were not real. It was the smile that said she required nothing, feared nothing, and had learned to be grateful for less than kindness. Halverton's expression did not change. Yet his gaze lowered from her mouth to her hand, where Varley's fingers closed again, a round grid for the next figure. The dance ended. Applause stirred politely. Cressida withdrew her hand at once and folded it beneath the dance card. The glove had twisted slightly at the wrist. She felt the seam strain, but she did not look down. "I must sit for a moment," she said. "Of course," Varley replied. He guided her not toward the chairs near the older ladies, but toward Lady Octavia. "After the next set is not yours." He merely tapped the square with the pencil. Beside two of the dances, where she had thought he had made a careless flourish, there was a small letter, K, not large, not obvious, hidden in the tail of his own signature. K. Keldane. A mark, not a request. "You see," he said, "it would be awkward to disappoint expectation now." Cressida's mouth went dry. Expectation can be corrected, not without cost. Lady Octavia approached before Cressida could answer. Her smile was wide enough to include Varley, and sharp enough to exclude her niece. "My dear Lord Keldane, you honor us too much, Cressida. You must not monopolize his lordship." The cruelty of it was almost elegant. Lady Octavia accused her of doing what Varley had forced, then smiled as if she had given a compliment. Miss Rosamond Pike drifted near with another young lady, both pretending interest in the lemonade table. "How devoted Lord Keldane seems," Miss Pike said, her voice sweet as sugared fruit. "A lady without fortune must be relieved when a gentleman is so forgiving of practical disadvantages." Cressida looked at her, just looked. Miss Pike colored, though she did not retreat. "Practical disadvantages often reveal impractical virtues," Cressida said. "Patience, for example, endurance, the ability not to mistake price for value." Lady Octavia inhaled softly. Varley laughed again, but this time the sound had an edge. Miss Pike's blush deepened. "How clever," she said. "Cleverness can be such a comfort when one has nothing else." "Then I wish you a lifetime free of needing it," Cressida replied. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but Lady Bexley heard it. So did two gentlemen beside the nearest pillar. So Cressida realized, with a strange pulse of alarm, did the Duke of Halverton. He had moved closer, not near enough to intrude. Near enough to hear the room choosing its next victim. Lady Octavia's hand closed lightly around Cressida's arm. "The waltz will begin soon," she said under her breath. "You will dance it with Lord Keldane." "A waltz?" Cressida asked. "After 2 sets already, do not be childish." "Lord Keldane has been generous with his attentions." "That is not generosity." Lady Octavia's fingers pressed once, warningly. "It is survival." Varley offered his arm again. The musicians were gathering the waltz sheets. A low murmur crossed the ballroom, because a waltz still carried intimacy enough to feed a week of speculation. Cressida looked at the card, KKK. Small dark marks beside his name, as though he had branded the evening without touching flame. She placed her hand on his sleeve because the room was watching, and because Lady Octavia's debts, whatever they were, had begun to breathe down her neck like a living thing. She did not tremble. She did not plead. She walked with him toward the open floor, while the candles shone, the fans lifted, and society prepared to misunderstand everything. At the edge of the light, Halverton's gaze dropped once more to her wrist. The seam of her glove had finally torn. A thin red line marked the skin beneath, left by pressure no one else had cared to see. The waltz began with a brightness that made the trap look beautiful. Cressida stepped into the first turn, because every eye expected it, because Lady Octavia stood near the flowers, with triumph hidden beneath her smile, because Lord Varley had placed his name on her evening so neatly that resistance would appear like ingratitude. The music gathered her before she was ready. Violins rose, warm and persuasive, and the room blurred into candlelight, silk, and lifted fans. Varley held her correctly, precisely, with no outward impropriety. That was what made it worse. His hand at her back never pressed enough to offend. His fingers never closed around hers long enough for a hostess to object. Yet every movement told her where to go, when to turn, how little space she possessed. The torn seam of her glove rubbed against the thin red line at her wrist. She kept her face composed. She would not let Miss Rosamond Pike see pain. She would not let Lady Bexley carry a story to supper. She would not give Lady Octavia the satisfaction of saying Cressida had made herself difficult when a gentleman had been kind enough to take interest. "You dance very well for a woman who looks as if she would rather be elsewhere," Varley said, turning her beneath the chandelier. "Perhaps I have had practice doing things I would rather not do. That is a valuable accomplishment in a wife. I have not agreed to become one, not allowed." His smile sharpened. Society often understands before words are necessary. The floor tilted beneath her, though her steps did not falter. Around them, the room watched with that eager stillness Cressida had come to dread. A third dance with the same gentleman was no longer merely attention. A waltz after 2 earlier sets was almost a declaration if enough people wanted it to be. Lady Octavia wanted it. Varley wanted it. The women near the wall wanted a story simple enough to repeat. Poor Lady Cressida, captured at last. Fortunate Lady Cressida, rescued by an earl from the embarrassment of having nothing. Foolish Lady Cressida, if she imagined she still had the right to choose. "You are thinking too much," Varley murmured. "It is another bad habit." "Then London must be full of excellent women," she said, "if thought is so unwelcome. Do not make me your enemy, Lady Cressida." The words were quiet. His expression remained pleasant. To the room, he appeared to be whispering admiration. "I have not made you anything, Lord Keldane. You seem determined to appoint yourself." He turned her again, and for one full measure, she saw the open doors at the edge of the ballroom. The Duke of Halverton had moved. He was no longer in shadow. He stood beside a marble column, dark evening coat severe against the golden room, his face unreadable. He did not look amused. He did not look jealous in any ordinary flattering sense of the word. He looked as if he had found a flaw in a structure that everyone else admired, and he meant to discover whether the whole thing deserved to fall. His gaze dropped once to her wrist. Cressida knew the exact moment he saw the red mark. Something in his stillness changed. not his posture, not his expression. Something colder than anger entered the air around him. The waltz carried her away before she could look again. Varley's fingers shifted over hers. Do not look at him. At whom? You are not a fool. No. That is why I noticed you answering a question I did not ask. His eyes narrowed for the first time. A small victory, a dangerous one. The music swept toward its first close, and Cressida counted the beats as though counting could keep her standing. 3 more turns. 2, 1. The final notes softened, and she drew breath, ready to step back, curtsy, and escape to the nearest chair no matter what Lady Octavia wished. Varley did not release her at once. He bowed, perfectly timed, then kept her hand over the boundary between courtesy and claim. The next set is quieter, he said. You will be glad of it. I said I must sit, and I said the evening need not trouble you. She lifted her eyes to his. You mistake command for kindness. His smile vanished so swiftly that she might have imagined it. Then the room around them shifted, not loudly, not dramatically. Yet people moved aside before Cressida knew why. Conversation thinned. Fans stopped mid-flutter. Lord Varley's hand finally released hers, but only because someone had come to stand directly beside them. The Duke of Halverton bowed with a restraint so exact it made every other gesture in the room look excessive. Lady Cressida, he said. His voice was low, controlled, and clear enough to travel. Your Grace, she replied, and was grateful that her voice did not break. Varley recovered first. Halverton. I did not know Lady Tremaine's musicians had improved enough to tempt you onto the floor. They have not. A ripple passed through the nearest listeners. Halverton did not glance at them. Then perhaps you seek our hostess? No. His gaze moved to Cressida, not as a man assessing a prize, but as one asking a question without exposing her to the room. I seek a dance. Varley laughed lightly. With Lady Cressida, I fear her card is rather full. So I observed. The words fell quietly. Cressida felt them more than heard them. Varley's fingers tightened around the edge of his own gloves. My lord, Halverton continued, you have had the whole evening. I require one dance. Silence opened in the ballroom, like a door no one had meant to unlock. Cressida felt the weight of every stare. Lady Octavia had gone pale near the flowers. Miss Rosamond Pike's mouth parted in astonishment. Lady Bexley leaned so far forward that her ostrich plume trembled. Varley's face remained composed, but his eyes had turned hard. Require, he repeated. A strong word, Your Grace, an accurate one. Lady Cressida may be fatigued. Then she may refuse me. Halverton turned fully to her. That was the moment everything changed. He did not speak over her. He did not tell the room she needed rescuing. He did not make her weakness public in order to display his strength. He waited. Cressida looked at him, then at the dance card in her hand, then at Varley, who watched her with a warning hidden inside courtesy. If she refused Halverton, Varley would claim victory. If she accepted, gossip would ignite. If she hesitated, Lady Octavia would drag her back into obedience before the next breath. Choice, she realized, did not always arrive as freedom. Sometimes it arrived as the least impossible door. She lifted her chin. I can stand. Halverton's gaze softened by the smallest degree. I did not doubt it. He offered his hand. No pressure. No assumption. Only an opening. Cressida placed her gloved fingers in his. The gesture was simple. The room received it like thunder. Varley bowed because he could not do anything else before witnesses and a duke. As Lady Cressida wishes, he said. How generous of you to permit it, Halverton replied. It was not loud, but several people heard. Cressida should have been alarmed. Instead, an unexpected steadiness entered her chest. Halverton led her into the next dance, with the measured care of a man handling porcelain he knew was not fragile, only precious. When the music resumed, she braced for being guided, corrected, possessed in another style. He did none of those things. His hand barely touched her back. His steps adjusted to hers. The space between them remained proper, but it felt like air returned to a room that had been locked. For several measures, neither of them spoke. Cressida was aware of Varley watching from the edge of the floor. She was aware of Lady Octavia's anger moving through the room like smoke. She was aware, most of all, of Halverton's attention. It did not crawl over her. It did not weigh her down. It steadied. "Your card," he said at last. "May I ask why Lord Keldane's name appears as if he purchased the paper?" Her breath caught. "I was being polite." "No." He guided her through a turn, his voice unchanged. "You were being cornered." The truth struck so cleanly that Cressida almost missed a step. Halverton adjusted before anyone could see. "You should not say that here," she whispered. "I have not yet said it loudly. You do not know what you are interfering with." "Then tell me enough that—" "I do not interfere blindly." She looked toward the walls, where gossip sharpened itself behind smiles. "My aunt is involved. Lord Keldane is not acting from admiration. There are debts. I do not know how many. I do not know what has been promised." And the marks beside his name. She looked down before she could stop herself. The small K marks seemed darker now. "I do not know. Did you write them?" "No." His jaw tightened, only briefly. "Did you agree to this understanding he is encouraging the room to imagine?" "No." The word came out softer than she intended. It still felt like rebellion. Halverton heard it. He turned her once more, then brought the dance to its close with such precision that no one could accuse him of lingering improperly. When the final note faded, he did not release her to Varley's approach. Instead, he offered his arm and angled his body so that anyone wishing to reach her would have to address him first. Varley came forward anyway, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Lady Cressida, I believe the next set is mine." Halverton looked at the dance card in her hand. "Lady Cressida has expressed fatigue." "Has she?" Varley asked. Cressida felt the room waiting for her to shrink. She did not. "I have." Varley's gaze flicked to her, cool and promising consequence. Then he bowed. "Then I hope your grace proves a restful companion." "I intend to prove an observant one," Halverton said. The Earl of Keldane bowed again, smooth as silk over a blade, and stepped back among the watchers. To anyone else, he looked defeated with grace. To Cressida, his eyes said what his mouth did not. This was not finished. By noon the next day, Pembury House looked as if London had emptied its curiosity onto the silver salver in the entrance hall. Calling cards lay in a neat accusing pile, cream and ivory and pale blue, each one small enough to fit in a gloved hand and sharp enough to cut a reputation. Lady Bexley had sent hers at 10. Lady Tremaine's arrived 20 minutes later, with a folded note expressing the warmest concern. Miss Rosamond Pike's mother had sent no note at all, only the card, which felt worse. Concern could be answered. Silence could only be interpreted. Cressida stood beside the drawing-room window and watched a carriage roll past the square, while Lady Octavia sat at the writing desk, slicing open notes with a mother-of-pearl knife, as if each envelope had personally offended her. "You have made us interesting," Lady Octavia said at last. "That is rarely a blessing for women without money." Cressida kept her left wrist tucked beneath the edge of her shawl. The torn glove from the night before had been hidden in her workbox, but the red mark remained, faint and stubborn, like the echo of a hand society had refused to see. "I did not ask Lord Keldane to write on my card." "No, you merely allowed the Duke of Halverton to notice that he had." Lady Octavia looked up. Her eyes were pale, dry, and furious. "Do you understand the difference between a girl being admired and a girl being discussed?" "I understood it when Lord Keldane wrote his name 3 times without permission." "You understood nothing." Letter knife clicked against the desk. "Lord Keldane is an earl with property, influence, and a willingness to overlook inconvenient circumstances. Girls in your position do not throw such men into ridicule before half of Mayfair." "My position," Cressida said very quietly, "is not so low that I must be grateful for being cornered." Lady Octavia rose. Her silk morning gown whispered around her like cold water. "Do not use that word again. It is an ugly word, and ugly words breed uglier stories." She crossed the room and stopped close enough that Cressida smelled violet powder and ink. "You were fortunate last evening." His Grace chose to behave like a gentleman in public. Men of his rank often enjoy an act of rescue when it costs them nothing. It does not mean he will protect you when the laughter begins. The sentence landed with cruel precision, because Cressida had feared the same thing before her aunt said it. The Duke had stood beside her. He had seen what others missed, but a single dance was not a promise. A duke could disturb a ballroom and then vanish into privilege, leaving the woman at the center of the disturbance to live among the consequences. Lady Octavia turned back toward the desk. If Lord Keldane calls, you will receive him kindly. You will smile. You will remember what is owed to this household. What is owed to him? Lady Octavia froze. Not much. Barely the length of a breath. Enough. Cressida felt it like a door opening in a dark passage. Do not be impertinent. You said debt would not wait for my self-respect. I said no such thing. Not in those words. Lady Octavia's face hardened. You have a dangerous memory for a dependent. Young woman. Before Cressida could answer, the butler appeared at the drawing-room door, with an expression that had been trained into neutrality and strained by surprise. His Grace the Duke of Halverton, my lady. The room changed. Lady Octavia's anger vanished so swiftly that it seemed never to have existed. Her shoulders settled, her mouth softened. She became graciousness arranged in silk. Cressida's heart struck once, hard. She had expected gossip. She had expected reprimand. She had not expected him to cross the threshold of Pembury House before the dust of last night had settled. Show his Grace in, Lady Octavia said. The butler withdrew. Lady Octavia moved toward Cressida in 2 sharp steps and lowered her voice. You will not speak of Lord Keldane as if there has been difficulty. You will not display that wrist. You will not mistake attention for devotion. I know the difference, Cressida said. Lady Octavia smiled. Do you? The Duke entered before Cressida could reply. In daylight, without music or candle smoke to soften him, Tobias Aveling seemed even more formidable. He wore dark blue morning dress, plain, immaculate, and almost severe. He bowed first to Lady Octavia, then to Cressida, and in that order he obeyed etiquette so precisely that no one could accuse him of impropriety. Yet when his gaze reached Cressida, it paused. Only for a second, only long enough to notice the shawl drawn too carefully over her left hand. Lady Octavia, he said. Thank you for receiving me. Your Grace honors my poor house beyond measure. Lady Octavia gestured to a chair with elegant warmth. We were only this moment speaking of last evening's unexpected excitement. Were you? A trifle magnified by idle tongues, I am afraid. London adores invention. London rarely invents without assistance. Lady Octavia's smile thinned, then recovered. How very true. Tea, Your Grace? No, thank you. He sat only after Lady Octavia did. Cressida remained near the window until her aunt's look commanded her to take the chair opposite. She obeyed, but slowly. The Duke noticed that too. He seemed to notice everything and reveal almost nothing. I called, he said, to inquire after Lady Cressida. Lady Octavia gave a light laugh. How kind. As you see, she is perfectly well. A little embarrassed, perhaps, by so much attention. Young women are often dramatic in their private feelings. I did not ask whether she was dramatic. Silence settled. Cressida lowered her eyes because she could not trust her face. Lady Octavia folded her hands. Of course not. Forgive me. You asked after her health. I asked after Lady Cressida. The distinction was so quiet that it took the room a moment to understand it. When Cressida did, something inside her loosened painfully. He had not asked her aunt to translate her. He had not accepted the explanation offered on her behalf. Lady Octavia turned her head. Cressida, His Grace has shown remarkable courtesy. Do reassure him. Cressida looked at the Duke. His expression gave her no instruction, no demand, no warning. She had the strange sense that he had placed a door in front of her and would not push her through it. I am not injured, Your Grace, she said. That is not the same as being unharmed, he replied. Lady Octavia inhaled. Your Grace, surely such language is unnecessary. On the contrary, Lady Octavia. It is usually necessary language that families avoid. Cressida felt the heat rise in her throat. She drew the shawl more closely around her wrist. Halverton's gaze followed the motion, but he did not expose it. That restraint moved her more than any declaration could have done. Lord Keldane was attentive, Lady Octavia said. perhaps overly so by strict interpretation, but he meant well. Did he? He is a valued acquaintance of this family. I am aware. Lady Octavia stilled again. You are? I am aware that letters passed between this house and Lord Keldane before Lady Tremaine's ball. The colour in Lady Octavia's cheeks changed barely beneath powder. Society is built on correspondence, Your Grace. So are arrangements. Cressida looked at him before she could stop herself. He had not found everything, but he had found something. Lady Octavia rose. I fear I do not understand the purpose of this call. Halverton stood as well, and because he was a duke, because he was taller, because rank itself seemed to enter the room with him, Lady Octavia's attempt at dismissal faltered. The purpose is simple. I intend to drive in Hyde Park tomorrow afternoon. Lady Cressida may join me, with a chaperone of your choosing, if she wishes. Lady Octavia's eyes flashed. That is generous, but after last night, I am not certain more notice is wise. Notice has already been taken. It may now either be shaped by others, or corrected by conduct. Corrected, a public drive with proper attendance will make one thing clear. Lady Cressida is not hiding in shame. The words entered Cressida like warmth after a long chill. Not hiding, not ashamed. Lady Octavia turned toward her. And do you wish this, Cressida? The question was a trap. If she said yes too quickly, she would appear eager. If she said no, she would hand her aunt and Varley the victory they wanted. Halverton waited. Again, he waited. I should like to take the air, Cressida said. Then it is settled, he replied. Lady Octavia's smile returned, though it had lost all softness. My companion, Mrs. Alder, may attend. Acceptable. Cressida nearly smiled at the word. Lady Octavia did not. When the Duke took his leave, he bowed over Cressida's hand without touching the injured wrist. Until tomorrow, Lady Cressida. His voice dropped, not enough to be secret, but enough to belong to her. You looked last night as if the room had hands. For one instant, all her careful defenses failed. She looked at him fully. He did not pity her. That was the unbearable kindness of it. He saw the humiliation, but not as the sum of her. It did, she said softly. Then tomorrow, he answered. We shall give it something else to hold. He left before Lady Octavia could turn the sentence into something useful. From the window, Cressida watched his carriage draw away from the square. Inside it, Halverton sat opposite his secretary, Mr. Bell, who had been waiting with a leather dispatch case on his knees. The Duke did not look back at the house. Keldane, he said. Every debt, every creditor, every private note of obligation attached to Pembury House. Quietly, Mr. Bell opened the case. At once, Your Grace. Halverton's gaze rested on the passing street, cold and intent. And find out why Lord Keldane wants Lady Cressida Vale married before her next birthday. The invitation arrived folded like a compliment and sharpened like a knife. It came on thick cream paper, sealed with dark green wax, and placed on Lady Octavia's breakfast tray before Cressida had finished more than 2 bites of toast. Lady Octavia opened it with the pleased caution of a woman who expected either a favor or a threat, and by the time her eyes reached the signature, the color had risen high in her cheeks. How fortunate, she said. Cressida looked up from the teacup she had been holding too tightly. The house had been quiet since the Duke of Halverton's call, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the silence of servants walking carefully, of Lady Octavia not speaking, until she had chosen which words would sting most, of Cressida waiting for consequences that had not yet shown their faces. Fortunate for whom? Cressida asked. Lady Octavia's gaze flicked to her. For you, if you have the wit to recognize it. Lady Eastmere is hosting a musical evening tomorrow. Lord Keldane has written to say he hopes to find you there. Cressida felt the room narrow around her. Lord Keldane does not command Lady Eastmere's guest list. No, but he is favored by those who do. Lady Octavia set the invitation down beside her plate, then smoothed it with 2 fingers. Lady Eastmere is a patroness of excellent taste, and her evenings are discussed in every drawing-room worth entering. Attendance will reassure people that last night was nothing more than a charming misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when 2 people mistake the same thing, Cressida said. Lord Keldane understood exactly what he was doing. You will not be dramatic. I am trying to be accurate. Accuracy is a luxury for people protected by money. Lady Octavia rose, her breakfast untouched now. That anxiety had fed her better than tea. His Grace's drive in the park this afternoon has already made matters delicate. You cannot allow London to think you have shifted from one gentleman's notice to another, like a girl greedy for rescue. Cressida looked toward the window, where pale sunlight lay over the square. In a few hours she was to drive with Halverton, under Mrs. Alder's watchful eye. The thought had carried her through the morning, like a lamp in a narrow passage. Now Lady Octavia was placing Lord Keldane at the end of that passage. I did not ask for either gentleman's notice, Cressida said. No. You merely provoked both. The door opened before Cressida could answer. Nell, the youngest housemaid, entered with a fresh pot of hot water and a folded napkin over her arm. She was small, quick, and so anxious in Lady Octavia's presence that even the china seemed to tremble when she carried it. As she crossed to the table, the silver ribbon that held the napkin slipped loose and fell beside Lady Octavia's chair. It was nothing. A narrow length of ribbon, dull from use, touching the carpet without sound. Lady Octavia turned as if the girl had smashed a vase. Can you do nothing without making a display? Nell rocked into a curtsy so quickly, the water in the pot shivered near the rim. I'm sorry, my lady. It slipped. Everything slips with you. Ribbons, spoons, instructions, scents. Lady Octavia picked up the ribbon between two fingers. Perhaps you would prefer employment in a dairy, where elegance is not required. Nell's face went white. Cressida stood. It was my fault. Lady Octavia looked at her. Yours? I asked Nell to bring the hot water in haste. I did not notice the ribbon was loose when she entered. Nell glanced at Cressida in terrified gratitude. Lady Octavia saw the glance and disliked it. You have developed a taste for rescuing people beneath your station. No one is beneath kindness. How noble, how impractical. Lady Octavia tossed the ribbon onto the table. Go, girl, and learn to tie a knot before you cost someone more than patience. Nell fled. The door closed softly behind her. Cressida remained standing, her pulse quick but steady. She had not protected herself from Lord Keldane. She had not known how, but she could protect a maid from being punished for a ribbon, and the smallness of that victory made it no less necessary. Lady Octavia watched her with cool contempt. You cannot afford sentiment, Cressida. Not now. What happens now? You attend Lady Eastmere's musical evening, and if I refuse, Lady Octavia's smile was thin enough to cut paper. Then Lord Keldane may remember certain obligations that have been managed with discretion. Discretion, my dear, is the only wall between respectability and ruin. Your obligations, this household's, you mean debts. Lady Octavia crossed the room in 2 swift steps. Do not say that. Word where servants may hear. Then perhaps do not build my future on it. For a moment, Lady Octavia looked less angry than frightened, and that frightened Cressida more than anger would have done. You think yourself brave because a duke looked at you for 5 minutes, Lady Octavia whispered. You do not know what it means when accounts come due. You do not know how quickly doors close. Before your birthday, everything must be settled or there will be nothing left to save. Cressida went still. Before my birthday, Lady Octavia's face closed. I have said enough. What changes on my birthday? Your manners, I hope. The answer was too quick. Too brittle. Lady Octavia turned back to the desk, took up the invitation, and held it out. Tomorrow evening, you will wear the pale green gown. It is modest enough to calm gossip, and becoming enough not to insult opportunity. Cressida accepted the card, because refusing a piece of paper was easier than refusing the machinery behind it. Lady Eastmere's name lay across the top in graceful script. Beneath it, in a stronger hand, someone had added a short note. Lord Keldane hopes Lady Cressida will honor the room with music. Music. Not merely attendance. Display. Cressida folded the invitation once. He expects me to play? You play beautifully. That is not why, he asked. No. He asked because a woman at a pianoforte looks obedient, accomplished, and safely placed. Lady Octavia's honesty was more insulting than any lie. You should be grateful he understands presentation. That afternoon, Cressida entered Halverton's open carriage in Hyde Park, with Mrs. Alder seated firmly opposite and 2 footmen behind. The drive was proper enough to satisfy the most hungry gossip, but London still stared, bonnets turned, gentlemen lifted hats, ladies bent close beneath parasols. Cressida sat with her injured wrist, hidden beneath fresh gloves, and tried not to feel as though every tree along the carriageway had eyes. Halverton did not fill the silence with empty reassurance. He asked whether the air suited her. He asked whether Mrs. Alder preferred the shaded path. He pointed out nothing of consequence, and by doing so, made the drive feel less like a performance than it should have, only when Mrs. Alder's attention was caught by an acquaintance. In a passing barouche did he speak in a lower voice. Lord Kildane has written to you. Cressida turned her head. How did you know? Because he wrote to 3 other people first. Lady Eastmere, and 2 women who enjoy repeating what they should never have been told. She looked down at her gloved hands. He wants me at a musical evening. He wants me to play. Do you wish to? The question was so simple that she nearly answered too honestly. Wishing is not the word by which my aunt arranges my days. It may still be the word by which you arrange your answer to me. She looked at him then. The hard lines of his face had not softened, but his attention had. That was becoming dangerous. Not because it frightened her, because it did not. If I do not go, he will make my aunt's debts speak. Louder than I can. Then I will attend. You were invited, not yet. Can you simply attend an evening to which you have not been invited? One corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. I am a duke. People often discover they meant to invite me. It was the closest thing to humor she had heard from him, and it eased something in her chest before she could stop it. You must not turn this into a war over me. No, his gaze held hers, over your right to stand unclaimed, perhaps. Mrs. Alder turned back, and the conversation ended. Yet when Cressida returned to Pembury House an hour later, a small note awaited her on the hall table, delivered by Halverton's groom with no flourish. Lady Octavia was upstairs. Cressida broke the seal in the shadow of the staircase. Wear gloves you may remove. No signature, none was needed. The words stirred heat behind her eyes. Not romance, not yet. Something steadier and more frightening. He had noticed the injury, but he did not ask her to display it. He offered preparation instead of pity. That evening, after Lady Octavia retired, Cressida took the mother-of-pearl dance card from beneath her pillow and sat near the dying fire. With a hairpin, she worked gently at the lifted seam inside the cover. The lining resisted, then loosened. A breath of old paper slipped free, folded so small it seemed impossible that it had waited there for years. Cressida opened it with trembling care. The handwriting was her mother's. Faded, fine, unmistakable. Never let them mark your name for you. Cressida pressed the scrap to her lips, and for the first time since Lord Kildane had touched her card, she let herself believe the evening had not ended with his name. It had only begun with hers. Lady Eastmere's musical evening was arranged with such tasteful intimacy that Cressida understood at once why Lord Kildane had chosen it for his next trap. A ballroom gave a woman space to disappear between sets, behind columns, near the safety of other wallflowers. Lady Eastmere's drawing-room allowed no such mercy. Every chair had been placed to face the pianoforte. Every candle had been set to flatter the performer and expose the audience. The room was smaller than Lady Tremaine's ballroom, but it was far more dangerous because every whisper could be heard by someone and repeated as truth by morning. Cressida entered beside Lady Octavia in the pale green gown her aunt had chosen, modest at the throat, narrow at the sleeves, and too plain to be accused of vanity. Her gloves were new, not expensive but whole. Beneath the left one, the red mark at her wrist had faded to a tender line, and the folded scrap of her mother's handwriting rested inside the mother-of-pearl dance card in her reticule. Never let them mark your name for you. She had read it so many times before leaving Pembury House that the words seemed to beat beneath her ribs. Lady Eastmere greeted them with a smile that belonged equally to welcome and assessment. She was a handsome widow with silver-threaded hair and the calm authority of a woman whose invitations could improve or injure a reputation. "Lady Cressida, I am delighted you could come. Lord Keldane has spoken so warmly of your playing." "How generous of him," Cressida said. "Generosity is one of his better performances," said a low voice behind her. She turned. The Duke of Halverton stood just inside the doorway, dark and composed, as if the invitation had been his by right from the beginning. Lady Eastmere looked only faintly surprised, which meant she had recovered before anyone could enjoy the surprise. "Your Grace, London is blessed tonight. We had not dared hope for your attendance." "Then I am pleased to have exceeded expectation." His gaze moved to Cressida's gloves, then back to her face. He said nothing more. He did not need to. "Wear gloves you may remove." She had Lord Keldane appeared almost immediately, as if Halverton's presence had summoned him by irritation alone. In candlelight, Varley looked as polished as ever, his fair hair arranged with careless precision, his smile easy enough to soothe those who did not know how closely he watched. "Lady Cressida," he said, bowing over her hand. He did not touch her wrist. That, too, was calculation. "The room awaits its reward." "The room has not earned one," Cressida replied before she could stop herself. Lady Octavia's fan snapped open. Varley laughed, and those nearest them laughed with him, relieved to file her remark under wit instead of resistance. "You see, Lady Eastmere, I promise spirit as well as skill." "Spirit is safest at the pianoforte," Lady Octavia said. "One may admire it without allowing it to wander." Halverton's eyes moved to Lady Octavia, and for a moment the air cooled. "A curious theory, Lady Octavia. An old one, Your Grace. Old theories are often merely old mistakes well dressed." Lady Eastmere, sensing the edge, clapped her hands softly. "Music will save us from philosophy. Lady Cressida, when you are ready." "Ready." Cressida crossed the room because everyone expected her to do so. The pianoforte gleamed beneath the candles, its polished surface reflecting her pale gown and the ring of faces beyond. She sat, arranged her skirts, and placed her fingers lightly above the keys. Lord Keldane moved to stand at her right, close enough to turn the pages, too close. His position looked attentive. It felt like possession. "This piece begins softly," he murmured. "Do try not to let nerves run away with you. My nerves are better trained than some gentlemen's manners." His smile stayed fixed. "There's that dangerous tongue again. It has saved me more often than silence." He bent slightly, lowering his voice. "Silence saves families." The first page of music blurred. Cressida looked at the notes and saw instead Lady Octavia's pale face at breakfast, the words "before your birthday," the hidden scrap in her reticule, the K marks on the dance card. She breathed once. Twice then, a shadow fell across the music, and Varley stepped back because rank required space where kindness had failed. Halverton stood at the other side of the pianoforte. "Lady Eastmere," he said, without looking away from the sheet. "May I be of use? I have turned pages before without ruining a performance." A ripple of amusement passed through the room. Lady Eastmere smiled. "By all means, Your Grace. We must encourage rare talents where we find them." Varley could not object, not without appearing absurd. He retreated to the nearest chair, elegant and furious. Halverton remained beside the pianoforte, close enough to help, far enough to leave her unclaimed. "Begin when you wish," he said softly. "Not when they wish, not when he wishes, when you wish." Cressida lowered her hands and played. The first notes trembled, but only slightly. Then the music steadied. It was a piece her mother had loved, graceful on the surface, aching beneath. Cressida did not play it as display. She played it like memory, like refusal, like a voice that had been quiet too long and had found a language no one could interrupt. The drawing room changed around her, fans lowered. Whispering faded. Even Lady Octavia, who preferred usefulness to beauty, went still. Halverton turned the first page at precisely the right moment. His hand entered and vanished from her field of vision without crowding her. He did not rescue the music. He trusted her to carry it. That trust did something dangerous to Cressida's composure. It warmed it. It made it harder to hide behind mere endurance. Near the second page, Varley shifted in his chair. The movement was small, but she felt his displeasure like a draught. She did not look at him. She played through the passage he had expected her to falter over, and let the final chord settle into the room with quiet authority. Silence followed. Not the cruel silence of people waiting for a mistake. A different silence, a full one. Then Lady Eastmere began to applaud, and the others joined. Cressida stood, intending only to curtsy and return to her seat. Halverton stepped back at once to give her room. "You do not play like a woman asking permission," he said. The words were low enough that only she could hear. Her smile came before she could guard it. "Perhaps music is the only place no one has taught me to ask." "Then play often." Lord Keldane approached before she could answer. "A moving performance," he said. "Almost too moving. One would think you wished us all to feel sorry for you." Cressida met his eyes. "No, Lord Keldane, I wished to finish the piece." Lady Eastmere heard that. So did Halverton. Varley bowed, but anger had begun to show through the polish. How admirable. Completion is a virtue in arrangements as well as music. Before Cressida could reply, an elderly gentleman near the mantel leaned forward, peering not at her face, but at the reticule in her hand. The mother-of-pearl dance card had slipped partly free when she rose from the pianoforte. Its carved lilies caught the light. "Forgive me," the gentleman said. "That card. May I ask where you came by it?" Lady Octavia's head turned sharply. Cressida's fingers closed around the reticule. "It belonged to my mother." The gentleman stood with effort. His hair was white, his coat old-fashioned, and his expression had changed from polite interest to troubled recognition. Lady Eastmere said, "Mr. Ormond, you knew Lady Valehurst, did you not?" "I knew her solicitor," he said, "and in my youth I assisted with certain family papers." Varley's smile returned too quickly. "How charming. London has a memory for everything except discretion." Mr. Ormond ignored him. "Lady Cressida, your mother carried that card the season before her marriage. I remember because she asked that a note be kept with her settlement papers. Something about choice." Cressida's breath caught. Halverton's gaze sharpened. Lady Octavia gave a brittle laugh. "My dear Mr. Ormond, memory grows romantic with age. Surely a dance card has nothing to do with settlements." "Usually not," Mr. Ormond said. "This one may." The room had gone quiet again, but now the silence belonged to revelation. Cressida felt the hidden scrap against her side as if it had begun to burn through silk. "What settlement?" she asked. Lady Octavia stepped toward her. "This is neither the time nor the place." "No," Halverton said. "But it appears to be the first honest mention." Lady Eastmere looked from one face to another and understood enough to intervene with skill. "Mr. Ormond, perhaps you will take tea with me tomorrow and remind me of the details." Lady Cressida need not be burdened in public. It was kindly meant. It was also a warning to every listener. The matter had witnesses now. Varley bowed to Lady Eastmere. "How considerate. Young ladies are so easily distressed by business." Cressida turned to him. "I'm not distressed by business. I'm distressed by being treated as the object of it." His eyes flashed. This time several people saw. Halverton moved one step closer, not between them yet, but near enough. "Careful, Keldane." Varley recovered with a laugh. "Your Grace mistakes conversation for conflict." "No, I rarely mistake either." The evening resumed, but falsely. Another lady sang. Tea was poured. People spoke of weather, singers, Italian phrasing, and anything except the tension that had entered the room and refused to leave. When Cressida finally stood in Lady Eastmere's front hall, waiting for Lady Octavia's carriage, Mr. Ormond passed close enough to speak under the cover of footmen gathering cloaks. "Lady Cressida," he murmured, "if you are pressed toward marriage before your next birthday, seek your trustees before you sign or promise anything." Her fingers tightened around her cloak. "Why?" The old man's eyes flicked toward Lady Octavia, then toward Varley's carriage beyond the door. "Because if you marry before then, the wrong hands may claim the income." He moved away before she could ask more. A cold thread of understanding wound through her. Not enough to form the whole pattern, enough to show the pattern existed. When she stepped into the night, Halverton stood beside his carriage across the street, watching not her face now, but the people around her. Varley bowed from the steps with his perfect smile restored. Lady Octavia gripped Cressida's arm, as if affection had suddenly become necessary. And inside Cressida's reticule, her mother's hidden words waited like a key she had not yet learned how to use. The gossip sheet reached Pembury House before the breakfast rolls were warm. It had been folded twice, tucked beneath Lady Octavia's correspondence, and delivered by a footman who looked too carefully at nothing when he placed the tray on the table. Cressida noticed the paper at once, because it was cheap, grey at the edges, and already smudged by the many fingers through which scandal travelled. Lady Octavia noticed it because fear had taught her to recognize danger faster than dignity could hide it. She snatched it up, read 3 lines, and sat very still. That stillness frightened Cressida more than anger. "Give it to me," Cressida said. "No." Lady Octavia folded the sheet with quick, trembling precision. "It is vulgar nonsense. Beneath notice. Then it will not injure me to read it. You have been injured quite enough by your own behavior." The words struck before the meaning did. Cressida rose from her chair. She had slept badly after Lady Eastmere's musical evening, her mind crowded by Mr. Ormond's warning, her mother's hidden message, and the sight of Halverton standing across the street, like a wall between her and the dark. She had expected pressure from Lady Octavia. She had expected Lord Keldane to send a note. Perhaps flowers with thorns hidden in the wording. She had not expected London itself to arrive at breakfast with its teeth showing. "Read it aloud," she said. Lady Octavia's eyes flashed. "Do not command me in my own house. Then I will read it myself." Cressida reached for the paper. Lady Octavia pulled it back, but not quickly enough. The edge tore. Half of the page remained in Cressida's hand. The headline leaped out in black ink, "Cruel and merry. A poor lady, an earl, and a duke's amusement." For a moment, no sound existed. Not the soft clink of china, not the carriage wheels outside the square, not even Lady Octavia's breath. Cressida read because stopping would make the words more powerful. The sheet did not name her outright. It did not need to. It spoke of a certain impoverished daughter of a noble house, whose pale gown and eager accomplishments had lately attracted an earl of known generosity and a duke of colder tastes. It suggested she had allowed Lord Keldane to fill her card, then turned distressed. Eyes toward Halverton for a better prize. It praised her playing at Lady Eastmere's as a performance of remarkable feeling, especially for one who may soon be required to perform gratitude at the altar. Then came the line that made her fingers go numb. "Some young ladies have no fortune but instinct, and instinct may hunt higher than dowry." Lady Octavia covered her mouth with one hand, but the gesture was not grief. It was calculation disguised as shock. "You see now," she whispered. "This is what happens when a young woman forgets the safety of obedience." Cressida lowered the paper. "Who wrote this? How could I possibly know?" "Someone who knew I played at Lady Eastmere's. Someone who knew Lord Keldane had filled my card. Someone who wanted the story to make me look eager instead of trapped. The whole of London knew enough by midnight." "No." "The whole of London guessed. This was arranged." Lady Octavia rose so abruptly that her chair scraped the carpet. "Do you hear yourself? Arranged, trapped, cornered. Every word you choose makes you sound more unstable." Cressida felt the old warning beneath it. "Be quiet, or they will call your truth a weakness of nerves." "I sound inconvenient," she said. "That is not the same thing." Lady Octavia's face hardened. "Lord Keldane has offered to call this afternoon. How swift of him. He is trying to save you, from the rumor he likely fed." "Enough." Lady Octavia struck the torn sheet against the table, not loudly, but with enough force to make the spoons jump. "If Lord Keldane publicly announces an understanding, the laughter stops. If you accept his protection, the Duke of Halverton's involvement becomes a passing curiosity, instead of a ruinous contrast. You may not like the medicine, Cressida, but you are too ill with pride to refuse it. The door opened, and a maid brought in a second pot of tea. It was Nell. Her eyes flicked once toward the torn gossip sheet before dropping. Cressida saw fear there, but also knowledge. The sheet had already reached the servants' hall. By luncheon, it would reach every parlor where women pretended pity was kindness. "Leave us," Lady Octavia snapped. Nell curtsied and turned to go. As she passed Cressida, something pale slipped from beneath the folded napkin on her tray and fluttered near Cressida's slipper. Nell froze. Lady Octavia did not see it. Cressida bent and picked it up. It was not a note, only a scrap torn from another copy of the same sheet. But a faint smear of sealing wax clung to one edge. Dark green, Keldane green. Nell's eyes met hers for half a second. Then the maid fled. Cressida closed the scrap in her hand. Lady Octavia was speaking again, faster now. "You will receive Lord Keldane kindly. You will not provoke him. You will not mention Mr. Ormond's senile ramblings, and you will remember that whatever income may come to you is not yet in your control." There it was. The first admission, dressed in irritation. Cressida went very quiet. "So there is income." Lady Octavia's mouth tightened. "There may be, there may not be." Settlements are complicated matters, and young women who do not understand them should not build fantasies upon overheard fragments. But Lord Keldane understands them. Lady Octavia looked away. "He understands survival." "His or mine?" Lady Octavia did not answer. That afternoon, Lord Keldane arrived with white roses and a face arranged for sorrow. Cressida received him in the drawing-room, because Lady Octavia gave her no alternative, though Mrs. Alder sat by the window with her embroidery. And the door remained properly ajar. The roses lay on the table between them, too white, too fragrant, like innocents purchased by the dozen. Varley bowed with exquisite gravity. "Lady Cressida, I am desolate. How exhausting for you." His mouth curved, but his eyes warned her. "You must allow me concern. The sheet is shameful. I have already spoken to 2 gentlemen who dared repeat it with amusement. How noble. Don't fence with me. It's unbecoming when I'm trying to help. I was told my wit was all I had. Not all." His gaze moved over the room to Lady Octavia seated stiffly near the fire, to Mrs. Alder pretending deafness, then back to Cressida. "You have lineage. You have grace. You have a certain tragic appeal at present, though I would not recommend leaning on it for long." Cressida folded, her hands in her lap, so she would not show the scrap with the green wax hidden in her sleeve. "And you have a solution, I presume? An understanding?" Lady Octavia exhaled softly, almost in relief. Varley heard and allowed himself the smallest smile. Not an immediate announcement, if delicacy forbids it, but enough, a word to Lady Eastmere, a visible attentiveness at the next assembly. A few calls. London will decide it misunderstood. London will decide I belong to you all along. Would that be so terrible? Yes. The word landed cleanly. Mrs. Alder's needle stopped. Lady Octavia's fan went still. Varley's smile faded. "You should be careful, Lady Cressida. A woman's reputation is not repaired by defiance, nor is it repaired by surrendering it to the man who damaged it. You accuse me. I observe timing. Timing is not proof. Neither is a dance card filled by someone else, yet you found it useful." His eyes flashed. Then, smoothly, he rose and took a step toward the mantel, as if admiring a porcelain shepherdess. "You think Halverton will save you. He will not. Men like him enjoy a clean injustice. A lady fainting, a villain obvious, a room grateful for rescue. But your situation is messy. Debts, papers, a guardian with necessities, a girl with no fortune until someone permits her to claim it. Dukes do not marry mess. They tidy it and leave." Cressida felt the words search for fear and find it. She hated that they found any. Halverton had been kind, observant, steady. But kindness was not a vow, and no woman should build her safety on the possibility of being preferred. She looked at the white roses. "I would rather be spoken ill of than owned falsely." Varley turned back to her. For the first time, the pleasant mask slipped enough to show resentment beneath. "You may regret that sentence before the week is done, sir, but it will still be mine." Lady Octavia stood. "Cressida, you forget yourself. No, Cressida said, rising as well. I am beginning to remember. Varley bowed, but it was no longer graceful. It was controlled, forced. Then I shall leave you to your memory. At the door he paused and looked back with his smile restored for Lady Octavia's benefit. I hope you will consider what friendship can still prevent. When he was gone, Lady Octavia turned on Cressida with a face emptied of softness. You foolish girl. No one else will marry you after this. Cressida looked down at the torn gossip sheet still on the table, at the ugly headline that had tried to make her hunger where there had been only coercion. Her throat ached, but her voice held. Then I shall not be married as punishment. Lady Octavia stared at her as if she had spoken treason. Before either of them could say more, the butler entered with another card on a tray. Not Lord Keldane's, not Lady Eastmere's. The Duke of Halverton's seal marked the folded note beside it. Lady Octavia went pale. Cressida opened it with steady fingers. Only one line waited inside. Do not answer any accusation today. Let them reveal who taught them the words. Cressida read Halverton's note 3 times before Lady Octavia found her voice. Do not answer any accusation today. Let them reveal who taught them the words. The sentence was plain, without tenderness, without ornament, yet it steadied her more than any flowery reassurance could have done. It did not tell her to be brave. It assumed she already was. Lady Octavia extended her hand. Give that to me. Cressida folded the note once and slipped it beneath the edge of the mother-of-pearl dance card in her reticule. No, the word was small, but it altered the room. Lady Octavia stared as if a chair had spoken. You forget whose roof covers you. I remember it very well. Cressida closed the reticule clasp. That is why I have been silent for so long. Lady Octavia's face changed from shock to something harder. Silence has preserved you. No, it has preserved everyone except me. A knock sounded below. Before Lady Octavia could answer, not the timid knock of a social caller, but the firm announcement of someone too high in rank to be kept waiting. The butler's footsteps crossed the hall. Voices followed, low and formal. Lady Octavia's eyes sharpened with alarm, and a moment later the Duke of Halverton entered the drawing room without the slightest appearance of haste. He had chosen dark mourning dress again, but there was nothing ordinary in the way he carried the full authority of his name into Pembury House. Mr. Bell, his secretary, remained near the threshold with a leather case tucked beneath one arm. Lady Octavia, Halverton said, bowing. Lady Cressida. His gaze touched Cressida's face, then moved to the torn gossip sheet on the table, and the white roses Varley had left behind. He understood the order of the morning at once. Your Grace, Lady Octavia said too brightly. This is an unexpected honor. Expected, perhaps. He removed his gloves with controlled precision. Necessary, certainly. Lady Octavia's smile froze. If this concerns vulgar gossip, I assure you that we are handling it privately. That is precisely what concerns me. Cressida looked at him, then, and some warning in his stillness reached her too late. He had come to help. She knew that. But help, in a man like Halverton, might arrive shaped like command, because command was the language the world had always obeyed when he spoke. Lord Keldane called this afternoon, Halverton said. Lady Octavia's fan moved once, a gesture of concern, a gesture of ownership. Your Grace, that is a harsh interpretation. It is an accurate one. He turned to Mr. Bell. The secretary opened the leather case and withdrew a small bundle of copied notes. I have learned enough to make Lord Keldane's interest in Lady Cressida appear less romantic than strategic. I have also learned enough to know that delay serves him. Lady Octavia went pale. You have been investigating this family? No. I have been investigating a man who used a lady's dance card as a notice of possession. Cressida's fingers tightened in her lap. The defense should have warmed her. Instead, a chill moved through her as she heard the next sentence before he spoke it. Halverton faced Lady Octavia fully. I will take responsibility for Lady Cressida's reputation. Silence dropped. It was not the silence of relief. It was the silence of a door shutting. Lady Octavia's eyes widened, then gleamed with sudden calculation. Your Grace, she said softly, That is a most noble declaration. Cressida stood. No. Halverton turned toward her. Lady Cressida. No, she repeated. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. You will not settle my future in a room where I am present as if I were furniture. His expression tightened, barely. That is not my intention. Then do not do it by accident. Lady Octavia made a wounded sound. Cressida, you are overwrought. I am precise. She looked at Halverton, and it hurt more than she expected, because he was the last person she had wanted to oppose. You warned me not to answer accusations today. Now you are answering them with yourself. Something moved across his face. Regret, perhaps, or anger at being right for the wrong reason. London has already placed you in danger. London did not do that alone. She glanced at Lady Octavia. And I will not escape Lord Keldane by becoming another gentleman's responsibility. Halverton went very still. Lady Octavia saw the wound before Cressida did, and like all social predators, she moved toward blood. My poor niece speaks wildly, Your Grace. She has had a difficult morning. Naturally, your protection would be received with gratitude once she has recovered her sense. I have my sense, Cressida said. She stepped away from the chair, needing air, needing space, needing not to see herself reflected in the pity. Lady Octavia was preparing for public use. I know exactly what protection can become when it does not ask permission. Halverton's voice lowered. You believe I would force you. I believe you are accustomed to being obeyed. That is not the same thing. It can feel the same from below. The words struck him. She saw it. Not outwardly, not in any way Lady Octavia could enjoy, but in the slight withdrawal behind his eyes. For a moment he was not the Duke of Halverton, cold and immovable. He was a man who had meant to stand between her and harm, only to discover that his shadow could frighten her too. Lady Octavia folded her hands with poisonous calm. Your Grace sees the difficulty. Young women without guidance often mistake rescue for imprisonment. Halverton did not look at her. I have known imprisonment dressed as rescue, he said. The room quieted around that strange confession. Cressida heard it and felt her anger shift, not vanish, but make room for a question. Halverton closed his eyes for one brief second, then opened them. My sister was 19 when gossip took hold of her name. I acted too late, then too forcefully, and both failures cost her peace for years. I do not intend to repeat either mistake. Cressida's throat softened despite herself. Then do not begin by repeating the force. He absorbed that, fully, painfully. You are right. Lady Octavia's fan stopped. She had not expected a duke to concede. Neither had Cressida. Halverton bowed to her, not deeply enough to be theatrical, but enough to be unmistakable. I spoke as if my responsibility could answer your choice. It cannot. I beg your pardon. No one had begged Cressida's pardon in that room before, not for anything that mattered. The apology should have ended the conflict. Instead, Lady Octavia stepped in before trust could settle. How moving, yet practical matters remain. A lady's reputation cannot be repaired by speeches about choice. Nor by selling her to Keldane, Halverton said. Lady Octavia flushed. You insult me. No, I am approaching it, Mr. Bell lowered his eyes. Cressida might have laughed if her heart had not been beating so hard. Halverton turned back to her. Tell me what you wish done. It was the right question. Too late for that morning, but not too late for everything. Cressida wanted to answer. She wanted to say that she wished to see the letters Lady Octavia hid, to understand the birthday Mr. Ormond had warned her about, to know whether her mother had left more than a single sentence behind, mother of pearl. But Lady Octavia moved toward the desk, and the motion caught Cressida's eye. It was swift, protective, fearful, not of Halverton, of the writing drawer. Cressida saw, all at once, how often her aunt stood there when correspondence arrived. How often she locked that drawer before leaving the room. How often the key hung from her chatelaine and disappeared beneath her sash whenever Cressida entered. The letters were there, or something close to them. I wish, Cressida said slowly, to think before any gentleman decides my ruin or my rescue. Halverton held her gaze. Then he nodded. Then I will leave you space to think. Lady Octavia looked relieved too soon. Halverton noticed. I will also send Mrs. Alder tomorrow morning to accompany you on any errand you choose. If you choose none, she will call only as a friend. That is unnecessary, Lady Octavia said. It was not offered to you. He bowed again, gathered his gloves, and turned to go. At the door he paused. Lady Cressida. She looked at him. You said you would not pass from Lord Keldane's hand into mine, however gentler mine may be. Her face warmed. Yes, good. His voice was quiet, roughened at the edge. If ever you come to me, let it be walking. He left. Lady Octavia waited until the carriage had rolled away before she moved. Then she crossed the room and locked the writing drawer with a tiny brass key. The click was soft. To Cressida, it sounded louder than the waltz. You have offended the only man powerful enough to quiet this, Lady Octavia said. Perhaps, Cressida replied. But he listened. Listening will not feed this house. No. But secrets appear to have done so. Lady Octavia's face emptied. Go to your room gladly. Cressida curtsied because manners could be armor too, then left before her aunt saw the tremor in her hands. Upstairs, she found Nell waiting in the corridor with a basket of folded linen. The maid did not speak. She only glanced toward Lady Octavia's closed sitting-room door, then down at the basket. Beneath the top sheet lay a small iron hairpin, thin and bent at one end, a servant's key to impossible things. Cressida took it without a word. That evening, while Lady Octavia received a caller in the front parlour, Cressida returned to the drawing-room. Her pulse beat in her ears as she knelt before the writing desk. The hairpin slipped twice. On the third attempt, the drawer opened. Inside lay bills, invitations, and a ribbon-bound packet of letters in her mother's handwriting. Across the top, in Lady Octavia's firm script, someone had written, to be kept from Cressida until after her marriage. Cressida touched the packet, and the last of her obedience broke. The packet was tied with blue ribbon, so faded it had nearly become grey. Cressida held it in the half-open drawer, and felt for one breathless moment as if she had placed her hand inside her mother's heart. Lady Octavia's voice drifted faintly from the front parlour below, smooth and social, answering some caller with practiced ease. The house remained alive around Cressida in little sounds. A floorboard settling, a carriage passing in the square, a servant carrying coal along the corridor beneath. Each sound warned her to hurry, but the handwriting across the first letter stopped her cold. My dearest Cressida, if this reaches you before your marriage, then someone kinder than I feared has chosen courage over convenience. Cressida sank onto the small chair beside the desk. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. She unfolded the page. Her mother's words were not sentimental. That hurt and comforted her at the same time. Lady Valehurst had known she was dying. She had known her daughter might be left dependent upon relatives who valued lineage only when it could be exchanged. She wrote of a settlement created before Cressida's birth, a portion from her own mother's family, protected by trustees until Cressida reached her 24th birthday. The income was modest by the standards of dukes and great houses, but to a woman with no father, no brother willing to spend himself on her comfort, and no husband chosen freely, it meant breath. It meant a room of her own. It meant the right to refuse. Cressida read faster. The words blurred, then cleared. Under no circumstance, her mother had written, should House Keldane or any gentleman connected to it be allowed influence over this settlement. The late Earl of Keldane had once attempted to bind Lady Valehurst's portion through a marriage bargain, and though the effort failed, the family had not forgotten the possibility of money hidden beneath a woman's name. Cressida pressed one hand against her mouth. Varley's pale smile returned to her mind, his careful marks on the dance card, his reference to arithmetic, his insistence that society understood before words were necessary. He had never seen her as poor. He had seen her as locked. Lady Octavia had known where the key lay. Another letter waited beneath the first. This one addressed to trustees Cressida had never met. Mr. Silas Ormond's name appeared in the margin, not as trustee, but as a clerk who had witnessed correspondence. A third page listed conditions in precise language. If Lady Cressida Vale were pressured into marriage before her 24th birthday, the trustees could delay transfer of income and inquire into coercion. Coercion. The word stood on the page like a candle in a cellar. Cressida folded the letters with care she did not feel. She needed proof beyond what Lady Octavia could seize and deny. She needed a copy. She needed Mr. Ormond. She needed to act before the house closed around her again. A soft knock touched the door. Cressida nearly dropped the packet. Nell slipped inside with a basket of mending pressed against her hip, her face pale beneath her cap. "My lady, Lady Octavia's caller is leaving soon. How long? Maybe 10 minutes. Not more." Nell's eyes fell to the letters. "Is it bad?" Cressida looked at the girl who had risked her place for a hairpin and a glance. She could not drag Nell into danger blindly. "It is not bad because it is shameful," she said. "It is bad because it is useful to people who hoped I would never read it." Nell swallowed. "Can I help?" Cressida hesitated only a second. "There is ink in my room. I must copy the first page and the names on the second. If Lady Octavia comes upstairs, drop something in the corridor. Anything breakable if you must. She'll dismiss me. Then I will give you a character and wages for 3 months from whatever income these papers bring me." Nell stared at her. "You'd do that. I should have done more already." "No, my lady," Nell whispered. "You've seen me. That's more than most." The words nearly undid her. Cressida gathered the letters, slid the originals beneath her shawl, and carried them upstairs with Nell walking behind her, as if escorting linen. In her chamber the fire had burned low. The air was cold enough to stiffen her fingers. But she lit the small desk candle and began to copy. She did not copy everything. There was no time. She wrote her mother's warning about House Keldane. She copied Mr. Ormond's name. She copied the birthday condition and the trustees' right to inquire if marriage were pressed too soon. Her handwriting, usually elegant, turned sharp with urgency. Twice, voices moved below. Twice Nell stepped into the corridor and coughed to cover the scratch of the pen. When the copy was done, Cressida sanded it, folded it, and sealed it with plain wax. "Take this to Mr. Ormond if you can find where he lodges," she said. Nell's eyes widened. "Me? Not now. Tonight, if you are sent on an errand. Tomorrow, if you can leave with the laundress. If that is impossible, hide it until I find another way. Do not let Lady Octavia see it." Nell tucked the folded paper into the lining of her mending basket. "What about the originals?" Cressida looked at her mother's letters. Her first impulse was to keep them close, but closeness had never protected anything in Pembury House. She slipped the originals into the hollow, behind the loose backing of a small framed sketch over her washstand, then returned the empty ribbon to the drawer packet with one harmless bill inside, to give it weight. It was not enough. It was something. Downstairs, the front door closed. Lady Octavia's voice sharpened in the hall. Nell seized the basket. "She's coming." Cressida blew out the candle too quickly. Smoke rose. She opened the window an inch to thin the scent, but Lady Octavia entered before the air cleared. Her gaze went first to Cressida's face, then to the desk, then to the ink on her fingers. "What have you been writing? A note? To whom? Myself, perhaps. You have often said I require instruction." Lady Octavia crossed the room and took her wrist. "Not hard enough to leave a mark. Hard enough to claim the right. Do not be clever with me." Cressida did not pull away. "Then do not ask questions whose answers you plan to punish." Lady Octavia's eyes moved to the open window, the pen, the sand, Nell standing too still by the door. Understanding arrived in her face piece by piece. "The desk," she said. Cressida said nothing. Lady Octavia released her and swept from the room. Cressida heard the quick descent, the drawing-room door, the drawer forced open. A silence followed. Then footsteps returned, faster. Lady Octavia appeared with the ribbon-bound packet in her hand. She untied it. The bill slid out, her expression drained of all performance. "Where are they? Where who can no longer use them? You foolish, ungrateful girl. I'm not ungrateful for shelter. I'm unwilling to be traded for it." Lady Octavia shut the door and turned the key from inside. Nell made a frightened sound. "You will remain here until you recover your sense," Lady Octavia said. Nell, leave. My lady, I was just taking the basket. Leave it. Nell set the basket down by the door. Cressida's heart seized. The copy was inside. Nell curtsied, shaking, and slipped out when Lady Octavia unlocked the door just enough to push her through. The key turned again. Lady Octavia stood between Cressida and the world. Lord Keldane will hear of this hysteria. Call it hysteria if you like. It will still be evidence. Evidence? Lady Octavia laughed once, harsh and low. Against whom? Against the aunt who kept you fed. Against the gentleman willing to give you a name when gossip has dirtied yours. You have no idea how little sympathy exists for women who make benefactors look cruel. Then I shall not ask for sympathy. You will ask for pardon. No. The word rang through the small chamber. Lady Octavia stared at her. You are your mother's daughter. At last. For a second, pain crossed Lady Octavia's face. Real and old, but resentment covered it quickly. Your mother was loved because she was beautiful enough to be forgiven. Do not mistake inheritance for likeness. She opened the door, stepped into the corridor, and locked it from the outside. Cressida heard the key withdraw. Her room, which had always been small, became smaller. She went at once to the basket. The copy was gone. Nell had taken it. Relief struck so sharply that she had to sit. Minutes passed, perhaps an hour. The house shifted into late afternoon. Lady Octavia sent up no tea, no maid came. Cressida paced twice, then stopped because pacing gave fear too much space. She took the mother-of-pearl dance card from her reticule and pressed her thumb over the hidden seam. I have done something, she whispered to the empty room. Even if it is not enough. Hooves sounded below. A carriage stopped in the square. Voices rose in the hall, one male and controlled, one female and strained. Cressida moved to the door. The words were muffled, but the tone reached her. Halverton. Lady Octavia was denying him. Lady Cressida is unwell with nerves. Her aunt said, louder now, clearly meant for witnesses. She cannot receive anyone. Cressida placed both palms against the door. She could feel the grain of the wood beneath her skin. Shame tried to climb her throat, the old shame of being named fragile when she was inconvenient. She pushed it down. I am not ill, she called, her voice clear enough to carry. Footsteps ceased below. The house listened. Cressida drew breath and spoke again. I am not ill. I am inconvenient, silence answered first. Then Halverton's voice came from the foot of the stairs, calm as drawn steel. Lady Octavia, open the door. Lady Octavia did not open the door at once. For several seconds, Pembury House held its breath around the locked room, and Cressida stood with both palms against the wood, listening to the silence, gather weight. Below, the Duke of Halverton spoke again, not louder, only clearer. Lady Octavia, you have told me Lady Cressida is unwell. Lady Cressida has just contradicted you before witnesses. Open the door. Your Grace, Lady Octavia replied from the stairs, her voice strained by the effort to sound offended rather than afraid. This is a private household matter. A locked door ceases to be private when the lady behind it asks to be heard. Cressida closed her eyes. He had not said rescued. He had not said saved, heard. The word steadied her so suddenly that tears threatened, and she forced them back because this was not the hour for softness. Lady Octavia's feet moved on the stairs. A low murmur followed. Mr. Bell, perhaps, or the butler, or Mrs. Alder summoned as chaperone. If you insist upon creating a spectacle, Lady Octavia said, you will do more harm to her reputation than any gossip sheet. Then invite your companion, your butler, and Mrs. Alder to stand where they may confirm propriety. I have no wish to create a spectacle. I have every wish to prevent a falsehood from hardening into one. A key scraped in the lock. Cressida stepped back. The door opened, and Lady Octavia appeared with her face composed too tightly, as if one careless word might shatter it. Behind her stood Halverton, grave and pale with controlled anger, Mrs. Alder with one hand pressed to her reticule, the butler looking at the carpet, and Mr. Bell holding a leather case like a man prepared to remember every syllable. Halverton did not cross the threshold. That restraint entered Cressida more deeply than any dramatic entrance could have done. Lady Cressida, he said, do you wish to come downstairs? Lady Octavia made a faint sound of outrage. Cressida looked at her aunt, then at the corridor beyond, then at the small room behind her, where she had spent years being grateful for narrowness. "Yes," she said. "I do." Halverton stepped aside. He did not offer his arm until she reached the corridor. Even then, he asked with a glance, rather than taking. Cressida placed her fingers lightly on his sleeve, not because she could not walk without him, but because choosing support was different from being carried. Together they descended while Lady Octavia followed, furious in silence. In the drawing room, the white roses from Lord Keldane still stood on the table, their petals beginning to brown at the edges. Halverton looked at them once. "Remove those," he said. The butler obeyed so swiftly that the vase was gone before Lady Octavia could protest. Cressida almost smiled. It would have been a small, improper smile, but after a locked door, small, improper things felt like proof of life. Mrs. Alder took a chair near the window. Mr. Bell remained by the writing desk. Halverton stood in the center of the room and looked not at Lady Octavia but at Cressida. "What do you wish done?" The question arrived exactly where the wrong choice had failed. Yesterday he had declared responsibility. Today he returned it to her hands. Cressida felt the difference like air entering her lungs. "I have read my mother's letters," she said. Lady Octavia's chin lifted. "Stolen letters." "Withheld letters," Cressida corrected. "They concern a settlement made for my benefit, protected until my 24th birthday. They warn against House Keldane. They name trustees. They explain why Lord Keldane has pressed for an understanding before I come into control of the income." Mr. Bell's pen moved softly. Lady Octavia's eyes flew toward him. "Is your secretary recording private family accusations?" "He is recording statements made in the presence of witnesses," Halverton said. "If Lady Cressida wishes him to stop, he will." Cressida looked at Mr. Bell. "Continue." Mr. Bell's pen resumed. Lady Octavia's mouth tightened. "You have no idea what those papers mean. Your mother was ill when she wrote many things. She feared shadows. She feared precisely this." Cressida drew a breath. "I copied part of the letters and sent them to Mr. Ormond. It was not entirely true. Nell had gone with the copy, or so Cressida hoped, but saying it as fact gave the copy a chance to survive." Lady Octavia's face changed. Halverton saw it. "Mr. Ormond will be found," he said. "He already has been, Your Grace," Mr. Bell said, looking up. "He sent word to your house an hour ago. He confirms that Lady Cressida's settlement exists, and that Lord Keldane's late father once attempted to attach a similar portion through marriage articles." The room went silent. Cressida gripped the fold of her skirt. Truth, when spoken aloud by someone else, felt almost unfamiliar. Lady Octavia sat down, not gracefully. "You do not understand," she said. "No one ever understands the accounts until they come due." Halverton's expression did not soften. "Then explain them without locking your niece in a room." Lady Octavia looked at Cressida, and for the first time there was something naked in her anger. Shame, perhaps, or exhaustion. "Pembury House is mortgaged beyond comfort. Your uncle left obligations. Lord Keldane offered assistance, and yes, he expected a connection. Such arrangements are not monstrous. They are how families survive." "Families," Cressida said. "Or houses." Lady Octavia flinched. Halverton turned slightly toward Mr. Bell. "Lord Keldane's note?" Mr. Bell withdrew a folded paper. "Delivered to Pembury House this morning, but copied by the messenger before arrival at your request, Your Grace." Lady Octavia stared. "You intercepted private correspondence?" "No," Halverton said. "I paid attention to a man who uses paper as a leash, Mr. Bell read. "If Lady Cressida does not appear beside me at the assembly, I shall make the understanding known without the courtesy of further delay. Lady Octavia will appreciate the necessity, given our mutual exposure." The words fell one by one. Mutual exposure. Cressida saw Lady Octavia shrink under them. Not enough to absolve her. Enough to make her human, and therefore more painful. "He means to announce an engagement," Cressida said. "Whether I consent or not." "Yes," Halverton said. His voice had roughened. "At Lady Jersey's assembly tomorrow evening if his pattern holds. He believes the room will do the rest." Cressida looked down at her hands. They were steady now. Strange. She had thought courage would feel like fire. It felt more like a cold, clear surface under her feet. Then I must appear there. Lady Octavia lifted her head. Absolutely not. Absolutely yes, Cressida said. If I hide, Lord Keldane will speak for me. If I attend beside him, he wins. If I attend alone, they will tear me apart. So I will attend with witnesses, and the truth, placed where it cannot be tucked into a drawer. Halverton watched her with an intensity that warmed and wounded at once. Tell me how you want it done. No one had ever asked her how she wanted battle arranged. Mr. Ormond must be present if Lady Jersey will permit it. She will, Halverton said. Mrs. Alder should accompany me. Nell must be protected. Lady Octavia's head turned sharply. The maid? Yes. She saw enough, and she risked enough. Cressida faced her aunt. She is not to be dismissed. You make demands now. I make boundaries. Mr. Bell's pen paused, then continued. Halverton's eyes did something almost like pride, though his mouth did not move. And the dance card? He asked. Cressida touched her reticule. Lord Keldane used it as proof once. I will use it as proof of the opposite. The marks beside his name were not mine. The hidden note was my mother's. The card began as a trap because others wrote on it. It will end differently because I will. Lady Octavia whispered, You will ruin us. Cressida's voice softened, but it did not yield. No. I am only refusing to be used as the repair. A knock sounded at the door. The butler entered with another folded note, his face greyer than before. From Lord Keldane, my lady. He looked at Lady Octavia, then at Cressida, then, as if rank itself pulled the decision from him, held the tray toward Halverton. Halverton did not take the note. He looked to Cressida. The room waited. Cressida stepped forward and lifted the paper herself. The seal was dark green. She broke it. The message was short. She read it aloud before fear could advise silence. Tomorrow evening, Lady Cressida, I shall spare you the burden of choosing. Stand beside me when I speak, and all will be forgiven. Refuse, and I shall let London decide what sort of woman dances from an earl to a duke and calls it innocence. Mrs. Alder gasped softly. Lady Octavia closed her eyes. Halverton did not move, but the air around him seemed to harden. Cressida folded the note with care. Thank you, she said. Lady Octavia looked at her as if she had lost her senses. Thank you. He has put the threat in writing. For one brief, bright second, Halverton's composure almost broke, not into laughter, into something fiercer, admiration, restrained before witnesses. So he has. Cressida turned to the writing desk. A blank dance card from Lady Tremaine's ball lay among the scattered papers, unused because its ribbon had snapped. She took the smells pencil and wrote one word across the center, not in anger but in decision. Truth. Halverton came to stand beside her, close enough that she felt his presence without being crowded by it. Lady Cressida, he said quietly, after this is over, you may find London slower to apologize than it was to accuse. I know. You may also find that I remain. She looked up. The room, the witnesses, the threat, the years of being managed and measured, all faded to a narrow place between his voice and her heartbeat. Do you? I wanted you before I knew you had anything to lose. The words were not a proposal. They were more dangerous because they asked for nothing. Cressida held his gaze, then looked back at the card, then remain tomorrow, not in front of me. She touched the pencil to the final line. Beside me. Always, he said, and this time she believed he knew the weight of the word. Lady Jersey's assembly rooms had never seemed so bright or so merciless. Every candle looked polished for judgment. Every mirror doubled the number of eyes. By the time Cressida entered on Mrs. Alder's arm, with the mother-of-pearl dance card in her reticule, and the word truth written on the blank card inside her glove, she felt the room notice her before the footman had finished announcing her name. Conversations thinned, then resumed in softer, sharper forms. Bands lifted, heads inclined. Somewhere near the far wall, Miss Rosamond Pike whispered behind her mother's shoulder, and then pretended to study the musicians. Cressida did not lower her gaze. She had chosen a simple ivory gown with no ornament except her mother's small pearl pin at the bodice. Lady Octavia had called it plain before they left Pembury House, but plainness had become a kind of strength. Tonight, Cressida did not wish to be mistaken for bait dressed as a bride. She wished to look like a woman who had arrived in possession of herself. Halverton stood near the entrance to the card-room, speaking with Lady Eastmere and an elderly gentleman whose white hair and bent shoulders marked him before his name did. Mr. Ormond had come. Relief moved through Cressida so swiftly that she nearly faltered. Halverton saw it from across the room. He did not move toward her at once. He did not claim the space around her. He simply inclined his head once, as if to say he had kept his word, and would keep the rest of it. That small restraint steadied her more than any public rescue could have done. "You are pale, Mrs." Alder murmured. "I'm standing," Cressida replied softly. "That will do for the first minute." Mrs. Alder gave the faintest approving hum. Lady Jersey, splendid in dark velvet and diamonds, received Cressida with the chilly courtesy of a woman who knew scandal could ruin a room if not managed with elegance. "Lady Cressida." "You are brave to attend," Cressida curtsied. "No, my lady, I am tired of being absent from conversations about myself." Lady Jersey's brows rose a fraction. Then something like respect touched her mouth. "Then let us hope the conversations improve." They did not. Not at first. As Cressida crossed the room, she heard fragments fall around her like thrown pins. Keldane, Halverton, no fortune, too clever, poor thing, ambitious thing. The gossip sheet had done its work well. It had placed her in the old impossible shape. Too weak if she protested, too cunning if she survived. She paused beside a table of lemonade and waited, because Halverton had warned her not to chase accusations. Let them reveal who taught them the words. The first revelation came sooner than expected. Lady Bexley leaned toward Miss Pike and said, not quite softly enough, "One cannot blame Lord Keldane if he wishes to formalize matters. A gentleman must protect what has been so publicly attached to his name." Attached. Cressida turned her head. "How curious," she said. Lady Bexley stiffened. "Lady Cressida?" I had not realized a name could attach itself merely by being written too often. Miss Pike flushed. Her mother looked delighted by danger. Before anyone could answer, a small stir moved through the assembly. Lord Felix Varley entered as if he had timed the moment to perfection. He wore black and silver, elegant as ever, with a white rose at his coat and composure so smooth it made sincerity look vulgar by comparison. Lady Octavia arrived a few steps behind him. Her face was pale, but her posture held. Cressida felt no surprise. Her aunt had left Pembury House in a separate carriage, claiming a headache, and then recovering at the precise hour most useful to Lord Keldane. Varley bowed to Lady Jersey, spoke briefly, and then turned toward the center of the room. He did not seek Cressida first. He sought the audience. "Forgive me, my lady," he said to Lady Jersey, voice warm enough to carry. "There is an unfortunate matter of misunderstanding that ought not trouble your rooms, yet silence has allowed unkind speculation to flourish." The room quieted with indecent eagerness. Cressida felt Mrs. Alder tense beside her. Across the room, Halverton became very still. Varley continued, "A lady's reputation is a delicate thing. When my attentions toward Lady Cressida Vale were interrupted and misread, I hoped discretion might preserve her from further talk. It appears I was optimistic." A few women murmured. Lady Octavia looked down at her fan, the portrait of reluctant sorrow. Then Lady Octavia stepped forward. "My niece is overwrought. Lord Keldane has only behaved with concern." Cressida turned to her. It was the hardest thing she had done that evening. "Did you write to him before Lady Tremaine's ball?" Lady Octavia's lips parted. "That is a family matter. Did you tell him I could be pressed before my birthday?" "Cressida, did you?" Varley's face changed, barely. "Enough." Halverton saw it. So did Lady Jersey. Before Lady Octavia could answer, a small voice came from near the side door. "She did, my lady." Nell stood there in a plain cloak, trembling so visibly that several guests turned in surprise. Mr. Bell stood just behind her, his presence explaining how a housemaid had entered a room that would never have admitted her alone. In Nell's hands was a folded paper. She sent him a letter with the green seal. I carried one myself before I knew what it meant, and I carried Lady Cressida's copy to Mr. Ormond. Varley's expression hardened into contempt. A maid. A witness, Halverton said. His voice was quiet, but the room obeyed it. Varley turned toward him. Your Grace lowers the tone of the evening by producing servants for theatre. You lowered it when you made a lady's silence your stage. A murmur rose. Lady Jersey lifted one hand, and it died. Cressida looked at Nell. The girl's face was white with fear, but she did not retreat. Cressida crossed the few steps between them and took the folded paper. She did not hide the gesture. She wanted every woman in the room to see that courage could wear a maid's cap and still deserve respect. Thank you, Cressida said. Nell's eyes filled, but she nodded. Varley stepped toward them. Not far. Not enough to threaten, enough to make Nell shrink. Halverton moved then. One measured step placed him between Varley and the maid, between Varley and Cressida, between polished cruelty and the people it had counted on frightening. Careful, Keldane. Varley stopped. You cannot build a case on a servant's nerves and a lady's embarrassment. No, Cressida said. She opened the folded paper. But I can begin with your words. She read aloud the copied line from his note. Stand beside me when I speak, and all will be forgiven. Refuse, and I shall let London decide what sort of woman dances from an earl to a duke and calls it innocence. This time, the room did not merely quiet, it recoiled. Miss Rosamond Pike lowered her fan. Lady Bexley looked away. Lady Jersey's face became stone. Varley recovered with astonishing speed. A forgery, naturally. Conveniently produced by a maid. Nell flinched. Cressida did not. Then perhaps you will welcome Mr. Ormond's confirmation of my mother's settlement and the warning against House Keldane. Mr. Ormond bowed his head. I will give it. Lady Octavia stepped forward, her composure splintering. That maid is lying. The words cracked across the room. Nell went still. Cressida looked at her aunt and understood that the final door had opened. Lady Jersey lowered her fan. Then, Lady Octavia, she said, each word cold and exact. We shall continue this in my drawing room, where lies may be named with fewer listeners and better witnesses. Lady Jersey's drawing room was smaller than the assembly hall, but it carried more power. The walls were pale green, the candles were fewer, and the air had the intimate severity of a room where reputations were not merely discussed, but decided. Lady Jersey entered first, her diamonds cold against her throat. Lady Eastmere followed with Mr. Ormond on her arm. Halverton came in behind Cressida, close enough to be felt, and far enough to prove he had listened. Mrs. Alder brought Nell to a chair near the door, and Mr. Bell placed his leather case on a side table, with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that paper could do what shouting could not. Lady Octavia stood near the mantel, rigid with pride and fear. Lord Keldane remained by the window, his polished face restored, though the hand at his side opened and closed once before he remembered himself. We will be brief, Lady Jersey said. My rooms are not a court. They are also not a stage for falsehood. Varley bowed. Then I welcome clarity, my lady. I have been accused without proof by a frightened maid, and a lady understandably distressed by gossip. Nell lowered her eyes, but Cressida crossed to her before anyone could stop her, and placed the folded paper in the girl's lap. Nell is not frightened because she lied, Cressida said. She is frightened because telling the truth may cost her more than silence ever cost you. The room went still. Lady Jersey watched Cressida with unreadable approval. Mr. Ormond, she said, you have heard enough to speak? The old solicitor stepped forward, leaning on his cane, his voice thin but steady. I can confirm that Lady Cressida Vale is beneficiary of a settlement created through her mother's family. The income was to remain under trustees until her 24th birthday. I can also confirm that correspondence from the late Lady Valehurst expressed concern about any renewed connection between her daughter and House Keldane. Varley gave a soft, incredulous laugh. Old anxieties. Families write all manner of dramatic warnings. They do, Mr. Ormond said. Yet this warning named your father's prior attempt to secure influence over a similar portion through marriage articles. It was not dramatic, it was specific. Lady Octavia looked toward the carpet. That single motion was a confession to anyone trained in drawing-room warfare. Cressida felt her pulse steady. The truth had entered the room, and no one could now pretend it was merely nerves. Halverton spoke for the first time, Mr. Bell. His secretary opened the case and removed 2 papers. A note delivered from Lord Keldane to Pembury House this morning, he said, and a copied statement from the messenger who carried it. Varley's mouth hardened. You collect servants as if they were witnesses of rank. Truth does not gain or lose height by standing in livery, Halverton replied, Mr. Bell read the threatening line again, the one that promised forgiveness if Cressida stood beside Varley, and public judgment if she refused. Lady Eastmere closed her fan with a snap. Lady Jersey's expression did not change, which made it worse. Varley looked at Cressida then, and the charm finally slipped. You were nothing before this, he said. A dependent relation in a fading house. I offered you a name strong enough to stop pity at the door. The insult did what gentler words could not. It freed her from the last fear of seeming ungrateful. No, Cressida said. You offered me a cage and called it shelter because the bars had a title on them. Lady Octavia flinched. Varley turned on her at once. You assured me she understood necessity. Lady Octavia's face crumpled and stiffened in the same breath. I assured you she would be reasonable. You assured me she could be guided before her birthday. The room heard it. Every woman there heard the machinery behind the word guided. Lady Jersey's gaze cut to Lady Octavia. Is that true? Lady Octavia pressed one hand to her throat. For years, Cressida had seen her aunt command servants, callers, accounts, invitations, excuses. She had never seen her with nowhere to place blame. Pembury House was in difficulty, Lady Octavia said. More than difficulty, ruin. Lord Keldane provided temporary relief. He expressed admiration for Cressida. I saw no harm in encouraging a connection that would secure everyone. Everyone? Cressida asked softly. Lady Octavia could not meet her eyes. The house, she whispered, the name, not me. Silence followed. It did not need filling. Varley recovered enough to bow toward Lady Jersey. Even if Lady Octavia hoped for a match, hoping is not coercion. A dance card is not coercion. A gentleman's attention is not coercion. No, Cressida said, drawing the mother-of-pearl card from her reticule. But using all 3 to manufacture consent is. She opened the card and held it toward the candlelight. Your initials beside your own name. Your entries before my permission. Your attempt to present the result as an understanding. You did not need to drag me anywhere. You only needed London to mistake pressure for courtship. Mr. Ormond stepped nearer, his eyes catching on the loosened lining. Lady Cressida, may I? She hesitated, then gave him the card. He turned it carefully, lifted the inner edge, and drew out the tiny scrap her mother had hidden years before. The first message had already been read by Cressida in secret. But there was another fold beneath it, one she had not dared pull free for fear of tearing it. Mr. Ormond unfolded it with trembling care. His voice softened. Choice is the only dowry no one may lawfully steal. The words crossed the room like a benediction and a verdict. Cressida pressed her lips together. She would not weep in front of Varley. She would not give him even that. Halverton's gaze rested on her, fierce and restrained, and she knew he understood. Lady Jersey rose. Lord Keldane, you will not speak of an understanding with Lady Cressida in this house, or any house where my influence reaches. Your vouchers will not be honored while this matter remains under discussion. Lady Eastmere? My rooms will be closed to him, Lady Eastmere said. And I believe several others will find the same prudence. Varley's face darkened. You would ruin a man on the word of a dependent lady and a maid. Halverton stepped forward at last. No. On your own written threat, your debt arrangements, your conduct, and the testimony of those you considered too small to matter. Varley looked at him with naked hatred. You think this makes her yours? The room sharpened around the question. Cressida felt the old danger of being passed from one claim to another. Halverton did not look at Varley. He looked at her. Lady Cressida owes me nothing, he said. His voice was clear enough for every witness. If she ever gives me a dance again, it will be because she wishes to. The words struck deeper than a proposal would have. They did not display her, they released her. Lady Octavia sank into a chair. Cressida, she said, and for once there was no command in the name. I was afraid. Cressida turned to her. So was I, had no choice. You had won, Cressida said. You chose the house. The sentence did not shout, it did not need to. Lady Octavia bowed her head, and the gesture aged her. Lady Jersey spoke again, brisk, because mercy had to be kept separate from consequence. Lady Octavia, you will remove yourself to Bath until the trustees conclude their review. You will not control Lady Cressida's correspondence, movements, or household arrangements. Lord Keldane, you will leave my rooms now. Varley bowed with the bitter elegance of a man who knew witnesses prevented ugliness. As you wish. At the door, he looked back at Cressida. London forgets slowly. Then it will have time to remember accurately, she said. His expression broke for one instant. Then he left. The sound of the door closing was softer than justice should have been, but the room changed after it. Air returned. Lady Eastmere went to Nell and spoke gently enough that the maid's shoulders stopped shaking. Mr. Bell gathered the documents. Mr. Ormond returned the dance card to Cressida, with a bow that honoured not her rank but her endurance. Lady Octavia rose and approached her, stopping at a careful distance. What will you do with me? She asked. Cressida looked at the woman who had sheltered her, used her, feared ruin more than cruelty, and mistaken preservation for love. Nothing tonight, she said. That is more mercy than you offered me, and less than I hope to learn. Lady Octavia's eyes filled, but Cressida turned before pity could be demanded of her as another duty. Halverton stood by the window, alone now, his hands clasped behind his back. For the first time since she had known him, he looked uncertain. That moved her more than his confidence ever had. She crossed the room and held out the mother-of-pearl dance card. Your Grace, he did not take it immediately. Lady Cressida, you are free to keep every space blank. I know. And if you choose never to dance again? The echo of the life she had almost been forced into hovered between them. Cressida looked at the tiny square where no one had yet written. Then, she asked. His answer came quietly. Then I shall learn to sit beside you. The last wall inside her did not fall. It opened. Cressida placed the card in his hand. One dance, when I choose it. Halverton bowed over the card as if it were a vow. When you choose it, he said. And in Lady Jersey's drawing room, where her name had nearly been traded, marked and corrected by everyone except herself, Lady Cressida Vale chose silence no longer. By late September, London had learned the shape of the truth, though it had taken far longer to repeat honesty than it had taken to repeat scandal. Lord Keldane left town within a fortnight of Lady Jersey's drawing room, officially to visit an estate in the north, unofficially because creditors had discovered courage after Lady Jersey withdrew her favour. His invitations vanished first. Then his defenders grew vague. At last even the women who had pitied Cressida over lemonade began to say they had always found him too polished to be trusted. Lady Octavia removed to Bath, with a reduced allowance arranged through the trustees, enough for comfort, not enough for command. She wrote once, a letter stiff with apology and crowded with explanations. Cressida read it twice, answered with courtesy, and refused to let pity become another chain. She did not hate her aunt. Hatred would have required carrying Lady Octavia everywhere, and Cressida had spent too many years being burdened by the choices of others. Mr. Ormond helped the trustees restore the income her mother had protected, and Mr. Bell handled the last practical arrangements with the quiet satisfaction of a man who preferred justice filed in proper order. Nell did not return to Pembury House. Cressida gave her wages, a strong character, and a choice. To everyone's surprise except Cressida's, the girl chose to come to Meerbrook Hall for the autumn, not as a frightened housemaid beneath Lady Octavia's temper, but as a young woman learning music notation under the supervision of Halverton's housekeeper and the old music mistress Cressida had engaged. The subscription music circle began with 6 gentlewomen, who arrived in a hired carriage and looked at the Duke's great Hampshire estate as if they had accidentally stepped into a painting. There was a clergyman's daughter with ink on her cuffs, 2 sisters whose father had died in service, a widow's niece who played the harp badly but with fierce hope, and a shy girl whose hands shook until Cressida sat beside her and played the first measure. Merebrook Hall was not warm in the sentimental way of cottages in poems. It was large, old, and dignified, with long windows looking over lawns that sloped toward a narrow silver river half a mile beyond the terraces. Yet beneath its size there was a steadiness Cressida had never known in Pembury House. Doors opened without being traps, bells rang without fear, rooms held silence without punishment. She had come as an invited guest, not as a duchess, not as a fiancée, not as a rescued scandal placed under another name for safety. Halverton had insisted on that. "You'll stay as long as you wish," he had said when the invitation first came, his voice so controlled that only the faint tension in his hand betrayed him. "And if you don't wish it, Merebrook will remain where it is," she had replied. "You make your house sound more patient than most people." He had looked at her then with that grave attention that still had the power to unsettle her. "It has been waiting longer than I have." For 3 weeks he gave her time. He walked with her through the South Garden with Mrs. Alder or Lady Eastmere present. He sat in the music room while the girls practiced and turned pages when asked, never when not asked. He spoke to Nell as if her thoughts were worth hearing, and never once mentioned Lord Keldane, unless Cressida raised the subject first. He showed her the library, the chapel, the small room where his sister had once embroidered badly, and laughed about it, and the western terrace, where he went when memory made the house too crowded. Piece by piece, he let himself become less like a duke and more like a man. Cressida noticed all of it. She noticed that servants relaxed when he entered a room, though they stood straighter. She noticed that he disliked being thanked for ordinary decency. She noticed that he always paused before touching anything that belonged to her, even a book, even a shawl, as if consent were not an event but a habit. On the last evening of the music circle's first week, Cressida stood in the music room after the students had gone, listening to the fading sound of carriage wheels on the drive. The room held the smell of beeswax, paper, and late roses brought in from the garden. On the pianoforte lay the mother-of-pearl dance card, its tiny hinge repaired by a jeweler in Winchester, its inner lining cleaned but not replaced. Her mother's hidden notes rested now in a small blue case beside it, no longer buried, no longer secret. Cressida touched the carved lilies with one finger. The door opened quietly. Halverton entered, then stopped at once. "I thought you had gone to supper." "Not yet." "May I come in?" She smiled without turning. "You own the room." "That wasn't my question." The words settled gently between them. She looked back. He stood in dark evening dress, not because guests required it, but because tonight the household was giving a small dinner for the music circle's patrons. There were no gossiping crowds, no mothers weighing daughters, no men placing names where they did not belong. Only music, lamplight, and a woman who had finally come to a place where refusal would be honored as fully as acceptance. "Yes," she said. "You may come in." He crossed the room and stopped beside the pianoforte. His gaze fell to the dance card. "I wondered whether you would keep it. I wondered the same thing, and I decided I would not surrender my mother's gift merely because others misused it." His eyes softened. She would have approved. Cressida looked down at the little squares inside the card, blank spaces. Once they had frightened her. They had seemed like places where others could write claims, expectations, debts, ownership. Now they looked like open windows. "Lady Eastmere tells me people in London have started calling me brave. Does that displease you?" "Not displease. It feels inaccurate. I was terrified through most of it. Bravery usually has the manners to arrive frightened." She laughed softly. "That sounds like something a duke says when he has never had to climb out a window." "Did you climb out a window?" "No. But I considered it." The drop was at least 12 feet, and I had no wish to prove courage by breaking an ankle. Practical as ever. Survival teaches arithmetic. He went still at the echo of Varley's old cruelty, but Cressida was not wounded by the phrase now. She had taken it back, simply by saying it without fear. Halverton reached into his coat and withdrew a small object wrapped in white paper. I have something for you. Not a jewel. That is a promising beginning. Not a settlement, not a document, not a rescue. Better still. He placed it on the pianoforte and unwrapped it. Inside lay a pencil, slender and silver, made to fit the repaired chain of the dance card. It was beautiful because it was useful. Cressida touched it, then looked at him. You replace the pencil. Only because the old one no longer wrote clearly. If you prefer the old one, I have it. Her throat tightened. He had learned the language of not taking away even broken things. No, she said. This one may stay. A faint breath left him, not quite relief, not quite joy. Something more vulnerable than both. There is a dinner tonight, he said. There will be music afterward. A few guests. No one who would dare whisper unkindly while Lady Eastmere is within reach. A formidable protection. Terrifying. Cressida opened the dance card. Her hand did not shake. In the final square, where no name had ever been forced, she wrote slowly, Tobias Aveling, if he still wishes. Halverton read it. For several seconds, he did not speak. When he did, his voice lost its perfect control. Cressida. She closed the card and held it out to him. Only one dance. He took it as if it weighed more than honor. Only one? One chosen freely may be enough to begin a life. The room fell quiet around them, but it was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence after a truth has found its place. He bowed not to her title, not to the scandal she had survived, but to the woman standing before him with her name restored. Then may I have this dance? He asked. Yes, she said. You may. There was no orchestra, only the soft memory of a waltz. She began to hum before she realized it. Halverton took her hand with careful warmth, and this time nothing in her braced for pressure. They moved between the pianoforte and the tall windows, slow and imperfect without music enough to guide them. Outside, autumn darkened over Meerbrook's lawns. Inside, the repaired silver pencil gleamed against a mother of pearl. When the final turn brought them to stillness, he did not let go at once. But he did not hold her captive either. His hand remained open beneath hers, waiting, always waiting. Cressida looked at it and understood at last what safety felt like. Not walls, not titles. Not a man's protection replacing a woman's will. Safety was a hand that could hold and still leave room for leaving. She stayed. Later, when the guests gathered, and the first notes rose properly from the pianoforte, Lady Cressida Vale walked into the music room on the Duke of Halverton's arm. Not hidden, not displayed, not forgiven for a shame that had never been hers. The young women she had gathered looked up from their chairs, and Nell smiled from beside the music stand with tears bright in her eyes. Lady Eastmere saw the dance card and hid a smile behind her fan. Halverton leaned close enough for only Cressida to hear. If you ever choose to stop dancing, I'll sit. Cressida looked at the blank spaces still waiting on the card, then at the room she had helped make gentle. And if I choose to keep dancing, then I'll learn every step. She smiled, and this time no one in the room mistook it for gratitude, surrender, or performance. It was simply joy, clear and unborrowed. The Duke remained beside her, not because he had claimed her in front of London, but because when all London had tried to decide her worth, he had waited until she could choose for herself. And Cressida, who had once been marked by another man's name, wrote the rest of her life in her own hand.